tell the people listening how you incorporate caffeine now, again, especially in the form of coffee, and do you ever take breaks from it? And are there boundaries that you have around it that make sure that it doesn't interfere with your sleeping protocol?
Perfect. Well, just as a caveat here, yeah, I still have not, quote, gotten a coffee with anyone. Like I've never like gone to a place and gotten coffee, all right? So people said, let's get a coffee, we'll get a coffee. Never happened, all right? The only coffee that I've had is just my special blend at my house. And one person did bring me coffee one time to my studio, Mark Bell, shout out to Mark Bell. But other than that, yeah, so when we're talking about my babyhood in the world of coffee, like for real. But the reason that I started to drink coffee, and I've got like the medicinal mushroom infused coffee, the reason I started to drink coffee was like the peer-reviewed data was nuts. Like it was, I just couldn't believe it. One of them, a recent study found that the caffeine from coffee was found to help to suppress genes that are related to inflammation. So helping to basically deactivate. See, I've struggled to say turn off or turn on. It's not necessarily like that, but just for communication's sake, helping to downregulate genes related to inflammation, age-related inflammation specifically, all right? And so there was one particular study that utilized caffeine, not coffee, but caffeine, to find out the impacts that it would have on sleep quality. And so what they did was they gave the test subjects caffeine literally right before they put them into bed. And this was a controlled clinical trial. Sleep ward study, so they can track everything objectively, like sleep monitors, and subjectively from the person's own opinion of how they slept. So they gave them caffeine directly before bed for one phase. They gave them caffeine 3 hours before bed for another phase, and they gave them coffee 6 hours before bed from another phase. Giving them caffeine, which was equivalent to about a large cup of coffee, like 300 milligrams, we'll say, of caffeine, 3 or 4. That was enough to cause measurable disturbance to the sleep quality, objectively measured by sleep monitoring technology, lost 1 hour of sleep. So subjectively, they might have thought they got 8 hours of sleep. Objectively, they got 7, all right? They lost an hour of sleep by having caffeine 6 hours before bed, all right? So even that long out, and here's where it all gets into your personalization. We all are unique. You have a unique caffeine metabolism compared to me. They're different. Caffeine on average has a half-life of, we'll just say, 6 hours. All right. There's even a spectrum for that, by the way. So it's tough to say. All right. So caffeine, we'll just say it has a half-life of 6 hours. That means if you have 300 milligrams of caffeine, after 6 hours, half of it is still active in your system, so 150. Then 6 hours later, half of that, right? So 75 milligrams, and so on and so forth, all right? So this half-life phenomenon. And what's happening with caffeine, it has this really, here's the thing too, people can be like, well, caffeine's bad. Just leave it alone. The human body has such a resonance with this substance, caffeine, it fits into receptor sites for adenosine, all right? So it was largely considered kind of this like metabolic byproduct in science for such a long time. But more recently, we understand that as we build up adenosine from just normal daily, day-to-day actions, cognitive stuff taking place, biological actions, we're building up this sleep inertia, all right? So we're building up, as this adenosine is going up, it's building up our need, our feeling for us to go to sleep, all right? And so caffeine can fit into receptor sites for adenosine. So basically, you're still producing adenosine as you're doing your day stuff, your life stuff, but adenosine can't fit into its receptor sites to start to nudge you to sleep. So you can be tired and not know it because of caffeine, all right? So that's really how it works. And it's also, of course, is a pretty strong nervous system stimulant, potentially, again, depending on the spectrum and your sensitivity to it. So there's a couple of ways that caffeine makes us kind of feel good or feel like I have more energy, right? So it has this resonance with the human body to even fit into receptor sites for something so remarkable. And humans have been having caffeinated stuff for, thousands and thousands of years. So with that being said, it's probably not a good idea to, if you're out at dinner, like, and you've seen this so often, I'm sure, they'll come around after dinner like, cappuccino, little cappuccino, You don't want to, if you're trying to get good sleep, you don't want to get the cap, like right then, okay? No cap. That means no lie, by the way. All right, that's shout out to the young folks. So, you probably want to avoid that. And also, alcohol, same scenario here as well. It's not, alcohol, funny enough, isn't as invasive to our sleep as caffeine can be in some aspects, because alcohol does in fact make you fall asleep faster. Fact. And many people know that. They drink alcohol to help them to wind down and go to sleep. But what's also very clear in the data is that it dramatically wrecks your REM sleep if you're having alcohol close to bedtime. It's called this REM rebound effect. So your REM sleep gets fractured, essentially. And during REM sleep is like, again, what I mentioned, it's where memory consolidation happens. And so this is why if you drink too much, if you drink a lot of alcohol, you have this phenomenon of not remembering what happened, right? Not this ever happened to you, Drew. Nobody listening, but maybe you know somebody, maybe you know a guy. They don't remember what, no, did I do that? They don't remember, right? It's because of the REM sleep being fractured. It's not just because alcohol it is it's so crazy that alcohol is kind of put in this different camp. It's a psychoactive substance, very, very strong, super legal in our society. And it's just kind of like overlooked that it's a very strong psychoactive substance. And more people die from alcohol than just about any drug you can name. Like you could combine a bunch of drugs together, some of the most nefarious. More people die from alcohol. Not to rain on anybody's parade, let me just be clear. If you're trying to get your sip on, all good, more power to you. It's just being aware of these things, right? And so in that, there's that aspect of it, but with caffeine, this is something where you can put it in its pocket, where if you're going to have caffeine, you know that it's disrupting your sleep quality potentially, just have a caffeine curfew, like have a cutoff time. Get your couple cups of coffee in before noon, right? Or whatever the case might be, whatever plan you have as far as getting to bed at night. So it's not saying that it's off limits, but just respect the fact that it is a very strong nervous system stimulant, and it is blocking this adenosine pathway, right? So you could think you have more energy than you really do in a strange way. And also the source that your caffeine is coming from matters a lot, because a caffeine that's in a pre-workout supplement is very different from the caffeine coming along with organic coffee. Now, you might say, if we look at the chemical makeup, same thing. But that's the problem with health care and health in general today, is that we've been led to believe that a synthetic version of the thing is the same as the thing in its original state. I'll give you a great example. I just found this out, that about 90% of the vitamin C supplements out there that you'll find, like when you're checking out, these little packets are from GMO corn. 90%. All right. So do you know how much work you have to do to get some vitamin C out of that, out of that weak piece of corn, GMO corn? It takes a lot, right? It's kind of like even a byproduct. They're probably trying to get high fructose corn syrup, and they got all this leftover, like throw it in some packets. Say it's going to help you to fight your colds, right? There's something remarkable about, and we've got studies on this, botanical sources of vitamin C. So one of them is camu berry. Do you know about camu?
I do.
Yeah. So
come on, man. We come from the raw food days.
Facts.
Come
My
on.
bad. No disrespect. No disrespect. No disrespect.
For those that are listening, little sidebar. Mr. Shawn here and myself were at one point in time raw vegans. We didn't know each other at that time, but we were hanging out in the same circles.
I knew about Drew. I knew about you, man. You were out here making it happen. For
Well,
real.
appreciate it. So yes, Camu Camu
Yes.
was one of the darlings
Yes.
of the raw food space.
Yes.
They would talk about it often, but tell our audience why it's so powerful.
Sure. It was thanks to one of the experts at the USDA, food scientists, who did some logging and just started to track this stuff of like highest botanical sources of various nutrients. One of those things he categorized was vitamin C. Camu Camu berry was found to be the highest botanical source of vitamin C by far. Like a teaspoon is like 700% of your RDA of vitamin C, like just a tiny amount. And so one of these studies, this was done on smokers. All right. So this was a study that was done on smokers, and they wanted to find out, does synthetic vitamin C versus Camu Camu berry actually hold up any kind of clinical benefit for somebody bringing in a strong oxidating factor, right? And so after giving the test subjects the Camu Camu berry, they found that that did in fact reduce their oxidative stress. The synthetic, basically that was the placebo, did nothing. All right. So it had no protective benefit from what they were measuring. All right. So again, we know that there's something remarkable about, it's not just the vitamin C. What about these cofactors? What about the things in that food that make it actually work and make that language transfer, that translation from external food stuff into human cell, that translator, is it going to be more effective with real food versus a synthetic isolated thing? And clearly, food first. There's something special about it. We're still trying to figure this out. We just don't know. We just don't know. There are hundreds of other food elements, even within that one fruit, that we still don't understand yet, right? We're just still operating on the stuff that we do know. But big picture things, we know that does work to help to reduce oxidative stress. So the botanical source is going to be ideal. So that was a little bit of a sidebar with the vitamin C, but it's an important part of the conversation as well today, because we've seen there's one peer-reviewed study intravenous for this particular virus that's been on everybody's mind the past couple of years, and seeing a remarkable protective effect with vitamin C. But again, like, this is not even necessarily the good stuff, right? So, but lots of people coming forward like say, make sure you get your vitamin C, make sure you get the vitamin D, all this stuff. We've got tons of studies on it now in some of the most prestigious peer-reviewed journals.
That source matters in particular.
And by the way, that study on the male smokers that was published in the Journal of Cardiology, and the intravenous vitamin C study that I mentioned in association with this virus was published in Pharma Nutrition. So folks can easily look that up. And what it was found to do is to help to reduce the impact of the cytokine storm associated with the virus by upping the person's vitamin C.
So for you, you mentioned these whole food forms. Are you primarily looking to include them in your diet? Any things that you're a fan of, feel free to mention products or anything like that. Like, do you feel like your diet is the core base, which we know, right? You said food first, but are there things that you're including in, especially because you're saying botanical sources, are there things that you're including in that are that extra insurance policy or things that you might pulse in at different times? Do you feel like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Listen, being in this field, and as you mentioned, I've gone through the spectrum, even doing a raw vegan protocol for a couple of years. And I lived in Missouri, cold winters, and I didn't have no cooked food. I go 100% on the stuff I do. Keto protocols, I'll do stuff for at least a year at a time. Vegetarian protocols, paleo protocols, the list goes on in my experimentation. Through those times, especially when I run into energy barriers or performance barriers, cognitive barriers, I'll reach out like, let me try and supplement this thing. So maybe doing a vegan protocol and I run into an energy barrier or some kind of benefit, some kind of performance metric that I'm used to. And I'm just like, okay, well, let me try B12 because that might be a deficiency, right? Or DHA, right? Which you're not going to get unless it's coming from an animal product. And so I experimented with, I can't even tell you how many different supplements over the years. Like it's a problem. But because I've done so much of that, I deeply, deeply understand that it's a supplement. It's to supplement an already healthy diet. It cannot fix problems when it's kind of like the food is a big mover. It's like a boulder. And the supplements are like tiny little nerd candies. Like they're tiny little pebbles, right? It just doesn't have the same metabolic weight. Not to say that these supplements can be incredibly helpful, but we got to get the other stuff dialed in, because you could be doing stuff with the big movers, big food, not that big food. We don't want to talk about them, but with the big movers, the whole food that is just basically counteracting the supplement that you're spending all that money on, right? So get the food first with supplements. At this point, I've really just kind of zeroed in on, I listen to my body now a lot more, and I just have a feel for things, and also just understanding what I'm eating, food combinations. But I'll tell you a couple of things that I have on a consistent basis. One of them is DHA specifically. So DHA and EPA, but specifically DHA is so important. And again, this is just on straight up hardcore science, because I did a brain scan with Dr. Daniel Amen. He had me on his show, and it's called Scan My Brain, right? So he scanned my brain, and he could see, he was just like, this looks like the brain of somebody who's been in a lot of fights, which, man, I was in a lot of fights.
Wow.
I got kicked out of school, high school for a year, got kicked out of college. Just growing up in a volatile environment, again, solving problems with fighting, And I didn't get hit too many times, though. I don't know why he said that. But there was this one time. I ran into a wall. That's a whole other thing. But also, he's just like, this looks like the brain of somebody who played football and has had some head trauma being in fights. And when I was 4 years old was my first head trauma. I have this scar on the back of my head. And my mother and the neighbors' caretakers, I don't remember if it was his mother, but there were two of them there. This kid, he's a bigger kid. I was like in preschool, I was 4. He was like 6. And we kept getting into little scuffles, little kids, but they made us fight each other. And this is not great parenting, by the way. And I understand today, I can look back on it with understanding. But at the time, I detested my mother for this. Like, I felt my safety, like, that's your mom. I felt like my safety was stripped from me, because I just remember very specifically feeling like, I don't want to do this. Why is she making me do this? But she understood the environment we were in. She wanted me to be tough. She wanted me to be capable. She wanted me to be able to defend myself, and I get it. Some of those things that she was kind of encouraging me, it saved my life a few times.
Because you got hit and you weren't as afraid of it, and you kind of like, it was a little bit more of a controlled environment. Is that what you mean? Like, in the sense of like, she was telling you to fight this other kid, and it was the idea of like, look, this is going to happen anyway, so let me just be around to be a process of toughening him up.
Yeah, that's a great way to articulate it. Yeah. But within 2 seconds of the fight commencing, the kid pushed me into the corner of a brick wall outside on our stoop and just split my head open.
Oh my gosh.
And, I was rushed to the hospital. I was on the gurney, the lights going over, the whole thing. And I felt so bad. Like, I felt like I let her down, and I was just like, I'll get him. And sure enough, so I had a bunch, I got stitches and the whole thing, but, I caught him slipping, this little kid, and, I got back at him. I'm not proud of that, but that kind of set the tone for like, I'm not going to allow you to hurt me. Like, I'm not much. The funny thing is, if we weren't doing this, I'd be in my office reading a book or researching. Unless somebody asks me stuff, I'm not the guy that's out like talking and trying to like, move the crowd, unless it's called upon, But so I don't really talk. Like, in all those scenarios, like being in the environment, people talk crazy. It's a lot of, there's a lot of talking. Not me. But as soon as the threat comes, I would just attack, And again, that was a phase of my life. But the crazy thing is, once I got physically healthier and really worked on changing my own health, it just simply didn't fit anymore for me to see people as a threat. constantly, because that's all I look for in my environment. Who's the threat? Who's the threat? And start to see people as people, and not just that, like I went from being self-centered to other-centered, which that's not necessarily good either, as a phase, because you can become so concerned about everybody else and helping others that you lose yourself.
Yeah.
Right. But that was a part of my healing, and to come to this place of balance, to sit here with you today and not seem like the guy that was out there, shutting the club down, throwing hands and that whole thing. And so to bring this all back full circle, getting a chance to see my brain, it's one thing to be aware of a thing, but to see like, oh, wow, I see the area of my brain that's not getting the blood flow, the activity. And he's got such a huge database. Like I think they've got over 200,000 brain scans that they've done. He knows the stuff that can move the needle. And so for him, it's just like, you have to get serious about DHA. And so number one, again, food first. What's going to be the viable food source? Everybody at this point probably knows this: fatty fish. The Journal of Neurology did some data on this. They found that folks eating just one seafood meal per week do in fact perform significantly better on cognitive skills tests. Even later in life, just one seafood meal per week. There's something to that. But here's the thing with DHA specifically, and if you're doing a vegan or vegetarian protocol, we're inclusive here. So when I was doing clinical work, people were coming in, I would have everybody get on like flaxseed and flaxseed oil and hemp seed oil and all these things. And I meant well, because I was like, you got to get your omega-3s. That is not the same as what the brain, when we're talking about DHA, those are used for structural fats to make your brain cells, right? Structural fats. So this enables signal transduction. This literally means your brain cells can't talk to each other efficiently when you're deficient in this particular substance. So DHA. It's ALA is what's in these plant sources. And your body can convert. This is the great thing about, and right now we're starting to understand how it happens, but your body can convert some ALA into DHA EPA. But you can lose upwards, depending on the person, your microbiome, your state of health, your genetics, you could lose 75, 90% in the conversion process. You will never reach the amount of DHA that you need, which again, another study that was actually using fMRIs to look at the brain, they found that people who were getting less than 2 grams of DHA per day had the highest rate of brain shrinkage. All right. So their brains were shrinking when they were, so the 2 grams is the bar. You're not getting anywhere close to that if you eat 2 cups of chia seeds. All right. You get closer to a bathroom, but you're not going to get closer to having the brain that you want. Right. And so
just one quick question on that. So to get that 2 grams equivalent, of course, you see a lot of supplements, it's pretty easy on the back, do the math and that sort of thing. But if you're getting it from food first, I mean, how many servings of fish are we talking about? Is 1 serving a day 2 grams? Is it more than a serving a day?
We don't even need to eat fish every day. And also, again, then you get into the conversation about pollution and, heavy metals, all those things, which we get so neurotic about that stuff and we miss the bigger point, right? Mercury is not out here like that on these streets, in these oceans, all right? As far as the fish are concerned, bigger fish, okay, tuna, yeah, swordfish, yeah, maybe be mindful. But salmon, you don't need to worry as much, Trout, again, like the smaller, well, salmon can be big as hell too, but so also you got to think about where are the fish at as well, a river versus the ocean, freshwater versus saltwater. There are all these other factors, but people are just shun the fish because, oh, I heard mercury's going to kill me, right?
Or being hyper-focused on microplastics, which at this point in time, not that we shouldn't be concerned. I'm probably more concerned about microplastics than mercury when, food supplies and sources. And it's pretty ubiquitous. So you do the best you can.
Yeah.
I think just taking it back to like the book Sleep Smarter, one of like the key sections inside of there is that don't let perfection become your enemy.
Yes, exactly. And so, I mean, when it boils down to it, maybe 2 to 3 servings, we'll just say 6 to 8 ounce servings of a high quality fatty fish source a week would do it.
So one clarification on that, So you probably were incorporating that into your diet, but because you had that extra damage that Daniel Amen saw on this SPEC scan, I believe they're called, you needed more on top of that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Got
Yep.
it.
That and some other things he
Some other
recommended
things.
as well. Yeah. And so, but also because it's a food source, just from my experience, I'm going to give more credibility to that DHA, even if it's lower than what's in this capsule. I'm going to give a little bit more credit in the bioavailability, just a little bit, again, because again, our association. But with the fish sources, you want to make sure the supplement sources that it's processed. You really got to do your homework with the company you're buying from. All right. It's super important. Making sure that it's the protection. The omega-3s are very delicate.
Super sensitive.
Yeah. So, and even when you're cooking, you don't want your fish well done. You don't want the salmon to be, well done. It could have, you could medium, is cool, but we don't want to just overcook the fish as well. So with vegetarian and vegan approaches, we can have some chia seeds and hemp seeds, that kind of stuff. But here's the thing. We've got to make sure we get that DHA, however, and by any means necessary, from the plant kingdom, right? So instead of fish oil, maybe we can go to krill oil, which is a microscopic shrimp. I'm saying shrimp quietly because the shrimp part could throw us off, but it's microscopic, okay? Maybe that fits in your line of ethics. But then from there, at least today, get yourself some algae oil. Please do your brain a favor. But I got to tell people this. I'm not that guy that's just going to be saying something because it sounds good. We don't have much, if at all, peer-reviewed, randomized controlled trials on algae oil being effective as a source of DHA. We know that it's in there. We know that the concentration is in there, but most of the studies are done on fish oil. And not to say that it can't be done or won't be done, but just right now we don't have it. Krill oil has some studies on it, and it's fantastic. The astaxanthin in there is so remarkable for so many other things, but also protective of the omega-3s that are in there too. So if you're on a vegan or vegetarian protocol, please get an algae oil like yesterday. And, from there, this isn't the only source of omega-3s. We also have eggs as well, grass-fed beef. The number one source is actually fish eggs. So salmon roe, caviar. Dr. Lisa Mosconi, again, neuroscientist, who's literally doing brain imaging, looking at the brain. She could see, these fish eggs, like eating this source of DHA actually shows up better for the brain than these other sources. So yeah.
Powerful.
So DHA is one. Another supplement that I do on a semi-consistent basis is camelberry, little combination camelberry, amla berry, and acerola cherry. These are, for me, top 3 vitamin C sources, botanicals.
And that's under the immune category, or just like a general, like, is there any sort of particular, if you had to carve it out, would you say that's just general immune system?
That's what people know vitamin C for, is for the immune system aspect. But vitamin C is a powerful antioxidant that does so much more in the body than just assist with our immune system. One of those things that it's responsible for, it plays a role in, is our sleep quality. All right. So this was published in the journal Appetite, and also PLOS One had some data as well, Public Library of Science 1. And it demonstrated that insufficient intake of vitamin C increases the likelihood of sleep disturbances and shortens the duration of overall sleep time. All right. So vitamin C isn't just a one-trick pony. All right. It does a lot of wonderful things for, yes, our immune system, our skin health, our sleep. So yeah, that's another reason that I get it in. I'd say at least around 3 to 4 times a week.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
Important and helpful recommendations, because I feel like one of the things that I always have super appreciated about you never feel like you have any pressure, and this is the authenticity of the Model Health Show, to make your routine sound any more complicated than it needs to be. Some people, even well-intentioned people, not knowing it, talk about their routine in a way, and with supplementation, sometimes it can feel like a competition, like how many supplements are people taking, or their their breadth of knowledge, or maybe they were taking it at some point in time, but they're not taking it right now. And again, my question is just for you, and what are you doing? Because that's helpful for people to know. So thank you for providing insight on that. I want to connect it back to extended sleep a little bit more so, because you were talking about camu camu and the sort of acerola cherry. We talked about a few beneficial supplements on top of a proper foundational things that we were saying. Most are free to super low cost tools that people can incorporate for their sleep. But give us a skinny again, or the reminder about supplementation for improving our sleep. What works, and maybe even a couple things that might be overrated that you see out there.
Listen, you can get the best mattress. You can get the cooling pad. You can get, your sun exposure in the morning, your exercise time, right? You can do all of these external things. If you're not bringing in the base nutrients, so I'm talking about the key nutrients that build your sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters, it's all made from food. All the stuff happening within our bodies is literally made from food. And if you're not bringing
that, that's so simple, but people forget that.
Yes. If you're not bringing in the building blocks, like again, you're still going to struggle to have the magic happen. And so with that said, one of the biggest biochemical movers, prerequisites for building these sleep-related pathways, hormones, neurotransmitters, processes, is magnesium. It's crazy how many different impacts that magnesium has on our sleep quality and just so many other aspects of our lives. It's now stated that around 600 biochemical processes are reliant upon magnesium. Let me give a big one. When I was in my university class and I was taught about ATP, right? The energy currency of the body that everybody talks about. It's on the tip of everybody's tongue. ATP is not biologically active until it's binded with magnesium. It's MgATP. These two things have to be together for it to be biologically active. I was not taught that. I paid for that education. They did not tell me that. How important this particular electrolyte is. It's in the category of electrolytes. So these are minerals that have an electric potential, right? So a conductive capacity. And this is how all of our cells are talking to each other, is this kind of electrical conduction. Our bodies are really just phenomenal. If you look at a heart monitor, that you're seeing the electrical output of your heart, all right? But we're so disconnected from these things. And then we hear the word electrolyte in our culture today, we think of Gatorade. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, there's this break in our awareness. So this was a placebo-controlled, double-blind clinical trial. This was published in 2012. And it found that improving magnesium levels appears to, number one, improve sleep efficiency. So we go through our sleep cycles more efficiently, improve melatonin function. So it's not just that you're making it, but is it actually doing the job that it needs to do? Reduced cortisol levels and reduced wake after sleep onset. Magnesium. So food first, dietary sources, pumpkin seeds, avocados, anything green is going to be a decent source of magnesium. So spinach and chard, but also what's in these categories of these superfoods, spirulina, right? So, but supplementation for a lot of folks is going to do them some good, but you just got to be mindful. There's so many different types of magnesium as well. This is where we get into such a complex thing that nobody has the right answer to right now, but it's good that we're experimenting. We're trying to figure it out. Because again, in my nutritional science class that I paid for at my university, when the teacher was telling us, oh, you need to make sure that you get your essential vitamins and minerals. What the does that mean? There isn't just one vitamin C, bucko. I'm just saying bucko to him in my mind back when I was 17, 18 in college. But there's different types of vitamin C. There's different types. People know about B vitamins, for example. B12, B6. There's different types of B vitamins. But even within B12, there's multiple forms of B12. All right?
I didn't know that.
There's multiple forms of vitamin D, right? There's multiple forms of magnesium. Okay? There's magnesium sulfate. There's magnesium citrate. There's so many different types of magnesium. So now some supplement formulations are like giving you a spectrum of different types, right? So, there might be like 5 or 6 different forms of magnesium in one supplement. Or a company's framing it like, this is the one. This is the one that you need. Like it might be a magnesium citrate, right? Which it does help with that relaxation response. But I'm not advocating for this, by the way, because some people know about magnesium. Like, that's not the one. But there are products that are just that, right? And I'm not gonna, well, you say names, but it might be magnesium calm, right? Calm's in the name. That citrate is going to pull more water to your bowels. And so it's going to cause, if you have even a little bit more than your bowel tolerance, which could be that same amount that's recommended, the 2 teaspoons, that serving. Maybe you give 2 heaping teaspoons on accident. And next thing you know, you're chitting all day. All right. You got to keep running off to the bathroom. Right. And you might be losing electrolytes because now you have diarrhea. Right. So you got to keep these things in context. So can I say the best supplement for magnesium? I can't say it. But shout out to the people that have dialed it in, or they're a part of a good company that's figuring this stuff out. We still don't know. And here's the reason why. The type of magnesium that you might need is going to be different from you versus someone else as well. We got to keep that in mind. This is why food is so wonderful, because you're getting a spectrum of these different forms of magnesium. It's not just one form of magnesium in that chocolate. There are different forms. And it informs your cells in a different way than a synthetic version can, right? And I'm also a big fan of topical magnesium too. I just put some on last night. So because through the skin, your skin absorbs magnesium pretty well, but especially if it's a great product that's done right. And also you can only absorb as much as your body needs. It's not going to hit a bowel tolerance. You're not going to be rubbing it on your skin. You just have to run to the toilet.
Which, by the way, I think Natural Calm actually changed their source of magnesium from citrate to something else, probably because so many people were having that issue.
I haven't had it in years. I haven't checked them out in years.
Yeah,
so I'm not to try to drag them. I think it's a great product from back in the day when I used to have it. It was also very helpful, like if somebody was doing a cleanse.
Totally.
Get yourself some of that magnesium.
Somebody was a little constipated. Get them some Calm.
Yeah.
But now it doesn't work anymore. I was going to recommend it to somebody and it didn't have citrate in it anymore. I was like, all right, got to find something else.
Oh, man. Hit that poop button. So, yeah, magnesium is definitely, as far as the sleep building hormones, neurotransmitters, pathways, magnesium is needed to even your muscle function, right? The relaxation response of your muscles, your body being able to relax. You can't really turn stuff off effectively without magnesium being present to run all these different processes. It's crazy how much it's responsible for. But guess what? It's very likely the number one mineral deficiency in our society today. I believe the latest statistics are somewhere around 56% of the American population is chronically deficient in magnesium.
Wow.
All right. So it's a big deficiency. Why is that? Well, number one, we're not eating real food anymore. And number two is magnesium is responsible for so much. It's getting zapped from our system. It's a stress modulating electrolyte. It's a stress modulating mineral. And we live in incredibly stressful, abnormal conditions today. So your body, it's just getting zapped from our system.
And probably too, we have no affiliation with this company at all. We're just fans of Mountain Valley Water, and they've been around forever. They have natural magnesium contamination on there, which a lot of spring water does, right? If you look at the back of the bottle, it says naturally occurring at the source, there's a certain amount of magnesium. And human beings who had and typically would set up villages around the world around springs would get their water from there. And we probably got a lot of natural contamination of magnesium in a good way. Concentration. Yeah, just through there.
You said contamination.
Well, meaning in a good way, not in a bad way. I actually didn't mean contamination.
Oh,
you got natural contamination. We often use contamination as a bad word.
I love it.
But as actually a positive thing. It has natural contamination. It has natural concentration.
Me and you should get contaminated right after this episode. You know what I mean? In a good way. I love it, man. Let's change these things around. But you mentioned it. Magnesium's in here on the label: magnesium, calcium, potassium. Those are 3 of the most important electrolytes.
Totally, which was naturally found in a lot of sources of spring water that's out there. So that probably plays into it. We have all this water that is great, has to be cleaned up and goes through the different systems and stuff, but doesn't have the same sources of minerals that we were used to. Nonetheless, we live in the modern world, and that's why we have podcasts like mine, like yours, to do the best that we can with the circumstances that we have. And when it comes to sleep, sleep is one of those things that if it's off or if it was on for you for a time period, and then because of a stressful few years, maybe stressful stuff that's going on right now that you don't have control over directly, not that you can't influence things and be the best citizen you can be, you could have a messed up sleep protocol again. So if anything, today's episode is that reminder that it is so fundamental to being the best version of you that please, for not just you, but for the world that could benefit from you being your best, give it the attention that it deserves. Any other final thoughts that you want to toss in?
I mean, man, that's perfectly said. So perfect. I really admire you so much, man. And I appreciate you, making this accessible and doing things at such a high level with such grace. It's so important today, and just thank you so much for creating this platform and making it accessible for people to learn this stuff, because what we're all trying to do, nobody's waking up like, you know what, I want to feel terrible today. I want to look my absolute worst. We all want to look good. We want to feel good. Most importantly, my advocation today is for us to strive towards being better humans. I think that that's one of the big issues today, is that, we're so externally focused and so worried about everybody else, and we're not focused on being the best us possible. And so much of our divisiveness today is really rooted in our very clear lack of health as a society. Our mental health is, it's insane, the levels of mental health issues that we have today. Over the last 2 years, but things were already elevating to astronomical levels. But then you add that to it's basically, putting gasoline on the fire, where we saw prescriptions for antidepressants shoot up over 20%, anti-anxiety, I think it was over 30%, medications. But then here's the problem. We don't tend to let go of the crutches, the biological crutches that we take on, right? So what's going to happen, what we're seeing in the data is the weight that we've picked up the last 2 years. There's this concept of recidivism. Once you pick it up, it's very difficult to let go of. The CDC looked specifically at our children during the first year of the pandemic, and they saw that rates of children who were just moderately obese, their annual rate of weight gain doubled. From around 6.2 pounds per year to 12 pounds a year. All right. And we might think, okay, they'll get back on track once this situation's over. No, especially during childhood, once we venture into this state of obesity, it becomes exceedingly more difficult to get to a healthy weight and a state of health as we get older. So the mental health issues, especially our children, again, the CDC, who everybody's been pointing to, but nobody's actually looking at their data, because they oftentimes contradict themselves with policy based on the data that is readily available on their website. They did an analysis of children, adolescents, and they found that nearly half of all adolescents and teens who they analyzed had suicide ideation, or thoughts of feeling persistently sad and hopeless.
Wow.
Right? So nearly half of these kids, all right, the suicide ideation was specifically in like 1 out of 4 of the kids, but persistently feeling hopeless, depressed, nearly half of the kids. All right. Now the question is, what are we going to do about it? It's very difficult for us to address these issues when we don't feel well as adults. And we all know what it's like. One of the things that I heard in my household growing up so often, my mom would say, "I'm tired, Shawn. Shawn, I'm tired." When she would try to scrape up a few dollars for me to run to McDonald's rather than her making dinner. She was tired. She was busting her ass, working overnight at a convenience store at a point to try to pay the bills. She'd sell her blood to try to pay our bills. She did all these things, try to make ends meet. But what results when we're not well is that it becomes more difficult for us to be there and to be an observant, good parent, and for us to stack conditions in the favor of our loved ones for better outcomes. So, I mean, to wrap it all up, man, I feel that the solution for many of our problems today, economic, social, is to get healthier citizens, is to advocate for our physical and mental health. Because with healthier people, we can have healthier conversations more easily. It's not that I can't have compassion for you and perspective take if I'm not physiologically well. It's just harder. It requires more energy. It requires, I've got to dig deeper into my reservoir to try to have the audacity to listen to you and to think that you're even a decent human being if I'm already so exposed. You know, I'm a live wire and I'm exposed because I don't have that nutritional coating around these exposed cells, this exposed wire, to make me feel more peaceful and present and patient, you know? And so, you know, that's the mission at the end of the day is let's do whatever it takes to get our citizens healthier. And you're a huge part of that, man. I'm just grateful for you.
These are the habits. These are the lack of priorities. These are the things that are genuinely eating and eroding at our foundation as a country.
Yeah.
What are some examples of those things, right? So number one, you just mentioned it. They would have us focus on convenience at all cost and prioritize a diet of ultra processed foods. That'd be number one, right? Number two, you mentioned earlier, they would have us live a more sedentary lifestyle to the degree that most people, the most amount of walking that they get in their house, besides shuffling around a little bit between the kitchen and that sort of thing, would be to maybe walk out to their car and then walk back in, right? What are some of the few other habits that you think a nefarious group might implement to try to destroy the foundation of a country?
Another thing would be to fracture the family unit. Because, you know, the longest running human study, longitudinal study, looking at like what really is protective of our health long term. And this was Dr. Waldinger and his associates at Harvard. They found that the number one thing impacting our health long term is our relationships. And to top it all off and then to dig in, like, why does this really matter? There's a meta-analysis of 148 studies, over 300,000 people. And this was conducted by researchers at Brigham Young University. And they found that having high quality relationships or healthy relationships led to a 50% decrease in all-cause mortality. That's a 50% reduction in death from all causes by having warm, healthy relationships. Now, the question is, how do we do that? How do we ensure that we have healthy relationships? We're not taught that in our culture. As a matter of fact, we're more fractured than we've ever been. We're more divided from each other. Even our nuclear families are so divided. We can be all in the same household, and I've seen it time and time again, and everybody's on their respective screen. We're disconnected. Our devices can be divisive. And so, and by the way, this isn't to villainize these things, because all of these things also have value. They tend to have value as well. Even with ultra-processed food. It might keep you alive in a zombie apocalypse situation. You know what I mean? I think about like The Walking Dead. If you happen upon, you know, some honey buns in a, you know, convenience store that's been bombed out and depleted, that might keep you going. You know what I mean? And that stuff's going to last for 100 years, you know? Are you going to thrive? Probably not, you know? So everything has its place, and it's not to demonize any of these things, but it's to take back our power. And here in the United States, and this has been spreading worldwide as well, but we're really the king of this. We don't understand the power of culture, because both you and I and many of our colleagues have been trying to get people to change behaviors, to not go to that ultra processed food establishment, or to go out and, you know, get their exercise in that their body is starving for. It's very difficult to make those behavior changes in a culture that is unwell, in a culture that is driving you to do the opposite. And that's really the issue that was being missed. It took me many years to figure this out. I've been in this field for 21 years as of this month. It took me years to figure this out. We have to address the culture. We talked a little bit earlier, their culture is still in existence on planet Earth, that their cultural belief is, if I don't move, I die. In order for me to eat, I am required to move, to gather, to hunt, to prepare food. And also, historically, we ate together as a species. This was all a tribal construct. Everybody was involved in the process of food, in the process of eating. We just got back from Hawaii recently, and this is it's a dramatization of something real, which is, this luau phenomenon, which is cool. You see the dancing and the food and all the things, but this is about, we're hunting and gathering, we're preparing the food, and we're eating together, and we're celebrating together, right? We see this as like, oh, that's this from this time that's forgotten. Like, look at this. This is really interesting. This is how we evolved. And so my question was, has something happened, a protective force field really, for that terrorist situation, a protective force against that, has that been destroyed with the fracturing of our family units, in particular surrounding food and eating together? And that question sparked this journey, which led me the first domino was this vast database that some researchers at Harvard were compiling, looking at family eating behaviors and their food intake. Like, what were they eating when they were eating together versus when they were eating separately in isolation? And what they found was that, in particular, when children were eating along with their parents on a consistent basis, they had a significant increased intake of vital nutrients that help to prevent chronic diseases, that lower our resilience, that make us more susceptible to disease and dysfunction, and also make us easier to manipulate if, again, we don't have that energy to stand up against whatever the force may be, right? And also, they had a significant reduction in intake of ultra-processed foods, chips and soda, namely in the study. And I was just like, this is crazy. This should be everywhere. Everybody should know this. Why don't people know this? And so, but I was just like, okay, this is an isolated data set. Although these are people at Harvard, they're pretty smart. But I was like, there's got to be some other research on this. And I found it. 2 studies. One was published in the Journal of Pediatrics. Another one was published in JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association. The researchers found that when families ate together with their children, just 3 times a week was that kind of minimum effective dose, 3 meals a week with their children. These children who ate consistently with their family, again, just 3 times a week, had a significantly decreased incidence of developing obesity and a significant decreased incidence of developing eating disorders by eating with their family more often. Now, is this going to be perfect across the board? No. But this is something that really stood out for these researchers, that there's something protective about eating together as a family unit. Last study, I'll share this one. This one hit me the hardest because a lot of people theorize about access and people not having an opportunity to be well, to eat healthy, to exercise and things like that, but they don't come from where I come from. I come from that environment where my family's on food stamps, where we're getting food from charities. Literally, there's this place called the Hosea House that we would get food from charities. Even my Christmas gifts for several years came from charities. And one time we actually went on this, basically a poor kid's trip. We didn't know what it was, and we got to ride in the Wienermobile, the Oscar Mayer Wiener.
Yeah.
It's out here rolling around on the streets. And we went to this, this place that they took us to, and we got these Christmas gifts. And, but the thing was, I got the same Christmas gifts every year, which sucked. Like, I kept getting Yahtzee, which I still to this day, I don't know how to play Yahtzee. But those were the conditions that we were in. And I can tell you, and I'm being 1000% with you here. I can count on my 2 hands how often I ate together with my family.
Wow.
All right. And usually most of these times was a holiday of some sort. And a lot of times in low income environments, one of the parents are gone and or we only have one parent. And so this was the situation I was growing up in. My mother worked overnight at a convenience store, and she's, again, trying to put food on the table. She sold her blood many times to get money for us to get food.
Wow.
But working at the convenience store, one of these evenings, somebody tried to rob the store, do something to her, and she was stabbed 8 times. And she ended up, my mom's different though. I mean, just from where we're from, she ended up subduing the guy, and the police came, all the things. But when she went to the hospital, got stitches, and, her physician told her that if you weren't overweight, you would have died.
Wow.
This body fat that you're carrying, you being a quote heavy set woman, saved your life. What's it going to do to her psychologically?
Wow.
That's her protection, right? And so again, this isn't, because sometimes it would be like, well, why don't you guys just work harder? You know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You know, like I'm sharing what my mom was doing to try to make it.
Of course. There's a reason why she's not able to have dinner with you. She's working.
Yeah, that part. And my stepfather was involved as well. He worked that late shift, 3 to 11 shift as a cook. But also we're growing up in an environment during the crack epidemic where, you know, many of my family members are getting addicted to drugs and alcohol. And so that's happening in my household as well, right? It's the culture. It's just like you're inundated with this stuff. And so with this being the case, regardless of the quality of food that we're able to purchase, this particular study, and I shared this, all of the studies that we're covering, by the way, most of them are in the Eat Smarter Family Cookbook, but researchers looked at low-income households of minority children. And it was so incredible because what they found was that families that ate with their children just 4 times a week, whatever meal it was, the kids ended up eating 5 servings of fruits and vegetables 5 days a week, at least. And significantly less processed food, chips and soda. And the researchers noted in particular when the TV was never or rarely on during family meals. Now, regardless of our circumstances, had my family known that we can have better health outcomes and protect our children just by eating together.
Even if it's fast food, that's all you're getting at that time. That's all you can afford. There's still a difference with eating together.
There's something that's unlocked. There's some shifts. We're talking about epigenetic influences. We could talk about why this is, by the way. Part of that is if we know, for example, we're having family dinner on Wednesdays, for example, there's going to be a subconscious, like, okay, the planning of it, like, okay, we're going to eat this, what we deem to be like a square meal, right? So that's going to be there. But sometimes life's going to happen. You're going to end up maybe ordering something, and that's okay. But still, there's something protective about eating together. One of those things is we see a significant reduction in that kind of sympathetic fight or flight nervous system activity, and that switching over to the parasympathetic, quote, rest and digest nervous system, significantly less stress when people are able to make it home. And we'll just talk about the adult side, which is another study that I cited as well. This was done on workers at IBM. If they were able to make it home for family dinners at a reasonable time and to have time with their family to eat together, their work morale stayed high, their stress levels stayed low. And stress is a huge killer. JAMA published this data years ago. Upwards of 80% of all physician visits are for stress-related diseases. Stress is a huge component of this. We can think ourselves into disease because our thoughts create chemistry in our bodies instantaneously. And so if we're having habitual thoughts of worry, of fear, of anger, we're just altering our chemistry. And this isn't bioidentical. This is made for us, in us, by us. FUBU, for us, by us. All right? And so we have to understand the power of our minds, and also the fact that being around people that we love, that we care for, there is this really innate activation of more health-affirming hormones and neurotransmitters like oxytocin. Just being with our family, with people that we love and care about, we're very good. Humans start producing more oxytocin, which oxytocin, this hormone, has this counter effect to cortisol. And we know this very clearly now. The question is, are we getting a healthy dose of it on a daily basis like we evolved doing? Because there's also a difference between being with your family and on a device than being with your family, right? So that's another reason why there's these better health outcomes. And one other thing, there's several other ones as well, but another part of this is the innate connection that happens and the health outcomes for the children, because now we can actually see them and we could allow them to feel seen. And so this is so important. We have a deep need to feel significant and to feel like we matter. And so for our children to get that, but also we could see their speech pattern, what excites them, what makes them kind of closed off, right? What conversation pieces. We get to really, the dinner table is a unifier. It's a connective entity, right? We know this outside of just our family circle. We talk about breaking bread, right? But just like even a lot of business is done over meals, right? A lot of connection. But truly for our family, that dinner table is acting as a unifier and a place of learning leverage for your children that are different personalities. I talked a little bit about my 2 kids' personalities. I've learned much of this by eating together with them, including yesterday. We're all sitting around eating. And because some of the things that I dealt with over the years and also working with a lot of people is, quote, picky eaters, right? We're trying to get healthier, but we're struggling to get our kid to eat certain things or, another family member. So what I started doing toward the end of my clinical work was I would find ways to talk to the family, right? And because I was very good at pointing out certain character traits and finding leverage points especially for the kids, whether it's like they're wanting to be a better athlete or a better mathlete, right? And I'd use that as leverage for them fueling their body differently, right? But here's the key. This should not be a secret at this point. It's using joy instead of using restriction. Me coming in and taking away things from this family. If I'm coming in, I'm like, sorry, kid, you can't have Fruity Pebbles anymore. That kid's gonna be pissed off at me and or rebel. He's gonna find a way to get those Fruity Pebbles. Versus let me find a way to get him something that he really enjoys equally or more. That's made from real food, which it should not be a secret anymore that is not just possible, but probable.
Or even starting with that first, and then you want to have a little bit of whatever afterwards, it's all good. And you've been mentioning kids, but there's so many people, that listen to the podcast that maybe they don't have kids or their kids are grown up, right? And they're like, hey, I'm done with all that parenting stuff. My kids are, adults on their own. But still, even if you have a husband, you have a wife, you have a boyfriend, you have a girlfriend, these are the same dynamics that show up there. How often do I hear from people, and I'm sure you do as well, it's like, I'm trying to make these healthy changes and my husband doesn't want to eat this thing, or my boyfriend doesn't want to eat that, or my girlfriend is not into this component. So it's like, how do we end up, or I'm divorced and I live alone and I don't have a significant other. My kids are off living their life. I don't want to bother them. They don't live nearby me. So I don't have somebody to eat with on a regular basis. And just that loneliness epidemic that's there for individuals that are in that position, especially as they get older. So all these same principles, they apply to everyone. It may not be the examples with your kids. It may be with somebody else, like your husband, your spouse, whatever it might be. Or it might be that you have so much lack of being able to share and break bread with other people that it's easier for you to fall into some version of being in despair. Yeah. Maybe you're not full-blown depressed, but you're just not as excited about things in your life because you don't have anybody to share it with. And that's no judgment on that situation. It's just to say, hey, we might want to prioritize this aspect of how at least even a couple of times a week can we break bread with somebody else.
Absolutely. And another thing was like, is there data on the health outcome when we're eating more so in isolation? And absolutely there is. And so I cited a study that found that when we're eating alone more frequently, our diet quality tends to be significantly lower. So the more intake of ultra processed foods and also far less intake of essential nutrients. Our diet is just worse when we tend to eat alone more often. Now, this doesn't hold true for everybody who's really just about that health life. But could you be missing out on another powerful ingredient by not eating more frequently with people you care about? And by the way, this extends to friends too. This isn't just family. This is friends is included in this as well. And so one of the things that I admire about you so much is that if this doesn't exist, you build it. You make it happen. If that friend group isn't there and you just like, I really want to, be the person that makes it. You said that to me several times. It's just like, we have so much power and agency in this, but we get attached to our story of what we're lacking. I come from lack. That's where I come from. And there is a way. Matter of fact, there's 10,000 ways. It's just changing our perception of these things. Because also seeing the advantages that you have. Because even in that environment, not having much at all, like real talk, not having much, it incites such a level of creativity that is kind of mirrored in society now, whether it's creativity towards music expression, towards athletics. We literally had the crate on the phone pole in the alley. Like we did that. And, also, there's some aspects of even creativity with food. One of my most prized memories of food. There's two. I'll share the first one really quickly because I've said Fruity Pebbles multiple times. It was my great grandmother who she's lived at a senior home, and she took me. There's like a little senior bus. They go to the grocery store, and I went back with her, and I was probably 4 at the time, and she poured me a bowl of Fruity Pebbles, which I'd never had. That I could taste it to this day. That food experience was like it stuck with me forever, right? And it wasn't she was trying to mess me up. She was just a great grandmother showing love to her great grandbaby that she is fortunate enough to spend some time with, right? And she knows that kids like this stuff because it's a kid's, quote, kid cereal, which is part of the problem. It's the cultural thing driving us to eat that food.
Kids' food versus adult food.
Mm-hmm. The marketing towards us to eat that ultra processed food. But another one is my stepfather. Man, so many times, man, we just be like, we're hungry, and just like there's not food. There's not anything to, really put together. And this was one of the days where he was there and my mother was at work and we didn't have anything to eat from my perspective. We're just like, we're hungry. And there was some government cheese, which is like this block. It's actually really tasty. It doesn't melt very good, but it's government cheese. There was some frozen deer sausage in the freezer that my grandfather had hunted and sent. All right. Which I didn't want anything to do with eating Bambi. That was my mindset. I'm not eating that. And we had some Texas toast, which is like some thicker bread that came along with like the WIC program or whatever it was. And there happened to be some tomato sauce in the cabinet. And my stepfather made pizza out of those ingredients. He was a chef and that creativity, and he made pizza out of that. And it was, I still remember this. I was like 8 years old. I'll never forget that experience. And being able to eat it with him, it's just so powerful, man. And it's not that it tasted like Domino's, it didn't taste like a typical pizza, but the fact that a kid loves pizza, right? I'm checking that box, and also this food experience with somebody that cares about me, and also making something out of nothing. That's the power that we have, man, and so I want us to embrace that power and to utilize that moving forward. That's the protective force against the terrorist organizations that might be, trying to dumb us down,
the nefarious groups,
hurt our health, make us less capable of performing. But, when it really boils down to it, man, there's something really special about eating together with the people that you care about.
What are a couple things right off the top that you think that people don't get when it comes to the quality of their sleep?
Yeah, that's a perfect question because there's a bigger picture. We think it's these little things that we can micromanage. But if we step back and look at how all this stuff really works, we start to understand the circadian mechanism, right? We're lined up with the solar day, literally synced up with the entire solar system through our suprachiasmatic nucleus, right? So it's this little aspect that's in our hypothalamus. It's kind of like a circadian pacemaker, and it's determining when all of our biological methods and mechanisms are happening, right? So based on the time of day it is, when we're in sync with this 24-hour solar day, is determining what our digestion is doing, like how robust our digestion is. It tends to be stronger in the day than in the evening. It's determining when certain hormones are getting produced, when our testosterone is getting produced, when our HGH is getting produced, certain neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin. All of this is synced up on this clock. Our blood pressure is going to change based on the time of day. The list goes on and on and on. There isn't a way to really escape this system, but we try. And that's kind of the issue today, is that we're kind of hiding out in a way because we can manufacture an artificial daytime at night today, with the advent of lights and all the crazy things we could do with lights. But also we can hide out from the sun during the day, that natural light input, and throw off that synchronicity that way as well. And so one of the ways that we're really wrecking our sleep today is that artificial light in the evening. And there's been a lot that's come forward since my book came out back in 2016. That was the major published version of it.
Sleep Smarter.
Sleep Smarter. International bestseller.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah.
21, I think it's 21 languages it's translated in. Each one a foreign distributor, foreign book deal. It's man, it really helped to change the game, and I'm grateful for that. So these conversations are being had now, and very easy access, easy on-ramp. But I think people are still missing some of the science behind it, because You said it. The CDC just did another report, and they noted that our epidemics of sleep deprivation is now, it's somewhere in the ballpark of about 115 million Americans are regularly sleep deprived right now, right? So, and all of the ramifications that come from that, the metabolic ramifications, the immunosuppressive aspects of it, the list goes on and on. It's not good.
Hunger, cravings
Yeah.
from not sleeping well. That's one of the things you talked about on the podcast the last time you came on to talk about sleep.
Yeah. So it's a master controller of so much of our reality. And so looking at what is one of the things that is really tearing up our sleep quality, it's having exposure to abnormal light in the evening. And specifically, researchers at Brigham and Women's Hospital at Harvard, they did a really fascinating study. And what they wanted to find out was, is reading on an iPad going to disrupt your sleep quality versus reading a regular book, right? Which they still exist. Drew has some here in the studio, by the way. It's an amazing new studio. And so what they did was they took test subjects and they had them to read a book for 4 hours on an iPad each evening for 5 evenings in a row. Then they had them do the same thing with a traditional paperback book or a hardcover book. They recorded all the data, and it was nuts. The folks who, during the phase of the study when they were reading on an iPad, this was enough to dramatically suppress their melatonin secretion. They had far less time and efficiency in their REM sleep specifically. So that's rapid eye movement sleep. One of the big things that happens during that phase of sleep is something called memory consolidation, right? So even what people are listening to right now is getting converted into your short-term memory during sleep, right? And so that was getting suppressed. Also, they found that they had a harder time falling asleep. And as a result, they were waking up feeling more groggy and having less energy during the day the next day by being on that iPad at night versus the conventional book. So what's going on here? Well, this is one of these advents that is very new in our society. Doesn't mean that we can't utilize our technology to great benefit for ourselves, but we have to be aware that this is brand new. In the scale of human evolution, this is something that is so new, we have no idea of the long-term ramifications of this because we simply didn't have exposure to light of this magnitude in the evening. At most, we had fire, all right? And we're just talking literally just a few decades ago. That was it. And so today, we have this spectrums of light, and what tends to happen is blue light is getting the bad name, right? So blue light is the big villain. Well, some other researchers come out recently, and there was even some data in Time magazine about this, that is actually yellow. The yellow spectrum of light can be problematic. But that particular study was done on lab animals, so on mice, which they're nocturnal. So that hue that's more associated with a different type of daytime, or maybe transitioning from dusk till dawn or whatever, we got to take some of this stuff with a grain of salt.
Sure.
Bottom line is artificial light of any type is going to throw off your circadian timing system, period. So that's one of the ways that we're really wrecking our sleep is our habitual patterns of in the evening, we're on. Some people are like, they're not just on one device, Drew. I don't know. You probably have done this before too. They're like having a device menage a trois. They've got the cell phone, they've got the TV, they got the laptop, right? So we got all these devices. And what's happening is we're really, again, throwing off this system. So understanding this is one of the things we're doing that's tearing up our sleep. What I want to provide also is what are some of the little hacks or quick fixes that we can do to help to remedy this situation?
So a lot of people have a question now, and Apple's done a good job of bringing awareness to people that, hey, okay, maybe we have night shift mode. But with everything that you've explained, and for those that are not familiar, and I think Samsung recently set this up on their phones, and the phone hue will go more yellow in the evening and sometimes even provide prompts if you set up the schedule. But with everything that you shared, do you think that's enough? Because some people are like, hey, listen, I got night shift mode, so I can still use my iPad, I can still use my iPhone right up until when I go to sleep. What are your thoughts on that?
That's obviously abnormal. It's not something that we're hardwired to associate with in the evening, period. Now, there are degrees. There's good, better, best scenarios here. For instance, in the evening, I've got my blue light blocking glasses. I helped to popularize them, so these companies have been working with me and reaching out to me for years who have this, kind of rudimentary technology, which is kind of like, it's like a protection in essence.
Filter.
And so with that said, we don't have too much clinical evidence as to their efficacy when we're talking about these blue light blocking glasses, apps on our computers. However, it's just logical. It's a logical input, but we don't have that much data on how effective they really are. So we need to know that. We got to keep that in our back pocket. But anecdotally, which we cannot ignore the anecdotal data, folks that tend to be on the computer or whatever the case might be in the evening, having some blue light blocking glasses, they do notice that they fall asleep faster. They have better sleep quality. We can even create this neuroassociation. I know some people, like as soon as they put those glasses, like the sun goes down, glasses come on, they start getting sleepy.
It's like a Pavlovian situation.
Yep. And it happens to so many people. So there's definitely some efficacy there. But good, better, best, what's the best method here? Giving ourselves a little bit more screen-free time period. Just get off the tech. Give yourself, if you're right now going right up until bedtime, which is what, like you said, a lot of people are doing, just give yourself 30 minutes, like a 30-minute space to not be staring into a device, which again is very abnormal. Now, here's the biggest leverage point to this argument. When we're staring into that small space, for example, maybe we're using our phone right up until we go to sleep. By us focusing into this small space, what we're doing is eliciting a part of our sympathetic nervous system, right? Because if we were to stare at something through our evolution for a long time, we're being hunted or we're hunting, all right? And we need to be on point. We need to have those hormones produced that is going to enable us to move quickly if it comes down to it. So these things, and I wonder if people just kind of think back whenever they're on their phone for a while. Let's just say, they're at work, they're an entrepreneur, they're at home, they're typing away and they're like, I'll just check my phone real quick, right? And then that just check turns into 30 minutes on Instagram, right? They get pulled into that internet black hole, which is a whole other part of the conversation we could talk about. And so now they're scrolling for 30 minutes. I want you to investigate, think back in your mind, how do you feel after being on your phone for 30 minutes or an hour and a half? Like as time is going by and you get off your phone, do you feel great? Are you just like, wow, that was amazing, I feel awesome? Or are you just like, man, I don't quite feel right, I feel a little bit off? And for most people, they're going to notice like, you don't feel that great after being on your phone for that amount of time. There's so much neurochemistry and so many abnormal hormonal interactions taking place that it's just kind of creating this chemical soup that our body's trying to adjust to. And so bottom line is, yes, we can have our blue light blocking app on our phone, glasses on, but we're still staring into that small space. And it's eliciting a part of our psychology, a part of our biology that's more associated with this fight or flight part of our nervous system, if that makes sense. So again, that's another check in the box of like, let's start with 30 minutes. I'm not saying 2 hours, 3 hours, just 30 minutes. But the problem, as you well know, is that we're addicted. And so if you decide I'm going to give myself this 30-minute curfew and you're used to, maybe for a couple of years, you've been on your phone until you go to sleep. And then you lay it right down on your pillow next to you. You got your little, electronic teddy bear there. But if we're going to be honest about this, we're very, very addicted to our devices. Right?
Absolutely.
We're constantly, if they're close, like we have this tendency to just check, just touch them. And so a recent study actually found that if it's even in your visual
periphery,
in your periphery, in your line of sight, it's going to throw off your attention. Right? It's pulling away your attention because your brain knows that there's a lot of potential reward there. There's a connection with your opioid system, right? Dopamine is driving that behavior to seek that reward. And with the internet, it's so interesting, especially social media, when you seek, because dopamine drives us to seek things, to seek reward, to discover. It's an important part of human expression and evolution. But if we don't find something, eventually we'll just kind of tap out or we'll go crazy. And so the internet is constantly rewarding us, especially social media, because you seek, I want to see the next thing. Oh, I found something. Seek, find, constantly. And it's just in training that opioid feedback, right? And so with that said, what do we do to supplant this? we have to fill that gap with something of greater or equal value to the phone, which is very tough to do because it's so hyperstimulating. Now, it's going to be different from person to person. This could be simply, listening to a great podcast. You don't have to stare into a screen to listen to a podcast or an audiobook that you really enjoy. That might be something you can do to wind down in the evening, right? Pop on a podcast that you like. Maybe put on your headphones or play it, on your speaker. This could be a time for you to read a conventional book. They still do exist. You don't have to read on the iPad. This is another thing that you could do. Also, this could be a great time to just maybe talk to your best friend. Maybe, you jump on a call, talk to your best friend. You don't have to stare into a phone to do that. Talk with somebody in your household if you're living with family members, right? Especially a significant other, right? I know, again.
Which I have a question about after you're done.
For sure. And so this is something that has been dwindling away today, this time, this one-on-one relationship. And that could also lead to something that can improve your sleep quality, which is sex. And there's tremendous amount of science on how our sleep quality influences our sexual function and how our sexual function influences our sleep quality. They're deeply, deeply interconnected, from the aspects of testosterone, from the aspects of oxytocin, right? So just being close to somebody that you have a connection with, you're going to be producing a lot more oxytocin. And oxytocin is one of those factors that helps to actually, some of the data is indicating that it helps to kind of buffer the effects of cortisol, right? And cortisol is not bad. It's just if it's produced at the wrong time and in the wrong amounts, it can be problematic, right? So it helps to supplant that. And so, we can supplant that. Hopefully that's more entertaining than the phone, right? So that's another option there. Maybe it's just hanging out, playing, board game. Maybe it's writing and journaling, whatever. You've got to experiment. Find something that helps you to not feel like you have the internet jitters and you just I got to grab my phone, right? So that's the thing. But just to finish off this point, that's the association with the electronic device, the tech. What about the ambient light? Because the ambient light is what's controlling and influencing that suprachiasmatic nucleus that I talked about before. So a couple of things you could do, very simple. They're super popular now. I remember when I wrote Sleep Smarter, I would experience this when I would go to like a nice hotel. They would have blackout curtains.
Right.
And for me personally, of the 21 clinically proven strategies in the book, that was the thing that I noticed when I got myself some blackout curtains at my house that improved my sleep quality very quickly. So blocking out the artificial ambient light as well, because it's not just your eyes. Your retina is picking up that data. That's most of the data is looking at that association from picking up ambient light through your retina and sending that data to your brain. Your skin also has photoreceptors that picks up light, that picks up information. And one of the ways I point people to, just to understand a logical, like your skin will literally change color when the sun's rays touch your skin. From millions of miles away, the sun is that remarkable that its little rays touch your skin and changes your skin color. All right. Your skin has photoreceptors as well. And researchers at Cornell University took a test subject and they put them into an otherwise dark room, took a light that, and it was the size of a quarter, and placed it behind their knee. And that was enough to disrupt their sleep cycle, right? This light input was throwing off their body, maybe again, all of their organs and their cells are just kind of like, what is this light? What is the sun coming up? I'm trying to figure it out, trying to sort it out, right? And so getting yourself some blackout curtains. This should be Captain Obvious at this point, but not sleeping with the television on, all right? I can't tell you how many times I fell asleep, of course, as a kid watching, I don't know, whatever I was watching. Probably stuff you wasn't watching, Drew, like, Cinemax late in the evening, you know what I mean? Cinemax After Dark, or whatever the case might be. Actually, I didn't really get to watch that.
We didn't have those premium channels, brother. We didn't
Me
have
neither,
those.
but sometimes, like every couple of months, they just put them on.
Okay,
they
got
put
it.
them on for you to like get that dabble, like this, you want this, right? So they give you like a free week of HBO or something. Man, we was broke too, man. So anyways, so not sleeping with the television on, if you don't have to have lights in your room that you're manufacturing yourself, like from an alarm clock, which most people are not even using alarm clocks these days, but maybe you just cover it up, maybe throw a towel over it, or, maybe if there's a dimmer switch on there, just getting out the ambient light in your bedroom itself, make it as dark and cozy as possible. If you do have an issue, some folks have been through stuff and total darkness is a bit, it can evoke some fear. Maybe we're looking at what are the hues that we evolve with, something closer to fire. And I'm not saying to have a candle burning all night either, but maybe like a salt lamp, and turn the dimmer down. So there's lots of options here, but the bottom line is to, block out the ambient light outside and in your bedroom, and give yourself that screen curfew.
One thing I noticed when my wife and I first moved in, when we were not married, and she would have this surge of energy that would come in the evening, and her sleep was off and off. I have a few questions about that. We'll chat about that in a second. So I started dimming the lights in our place. I started dimming the lights, and especially overhead light. I found overhead light very stimulating for her. And I try to get at least, the red lights that we had be a little bit more eye level, kind of recreating that sort of evolutionary history of where we kind of came from. And then she'd go in the bathroom, to brush her teeth and shower before bed. And the bathroom light, we didn't have a night lamp in there or anything like that, or a red light. And the bathroom light, which was overhead, she'd take a shower and she'd come out with a surge of energy again, and she'd have a hard time falling asleep. And when we swapped out, I just said, hey, sweetie, let's try something. Let's not use the overhead white, yellow, blue light in the bathroom. Instead, I'm going to stick up this little night light. Let's just do an experiment for a couple of weeks, see what happens. And immediately she'd come out of the shower feeling a lot more relaxed, feeling not as stimulated. We were also putting away the devices too. But something as simple as that was so helpful for us, and it just plays into exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah, that's a great example. And by the way, shout out to salt lamps. Like I have a salt lamp in my bathroom that we use in the evening,
So this goes to my second question, which is, do you and your wife who have met, she's lovely, amazing. We all just had dinner together recently. Do you guys have different routines, and do those routines ever butt heads against each other?
Oh man, my wife she's mischief in human form, man, for me, like she is so like, she's so adventurous, and, just, she doesn't care about time. She doesn't care about that stuff. She's just kind of like, this is my husband's thing, but she's seen the firsthand results in her life as far as, how she feels, her performance, her body composition, all those things when she's minding her sleep quality for sure. So, but we had to get to a place where she's paying attention to those things. And part of the process sometimes is just, just letting go, because we shared the story, I think, when we went out, we met at the gym. All right. We met at the gym. I was working at the university gym that we both went to.
Do you want to tell this story on the podcast? Not that it's bad or anything. Just looking out for my brother. Are you going to end up in timeout a little later on in this episode?
Listen, and nobody's going to tell her. All right. But I'll give it the short, tiny version.
Okay,
I'll leave out some of the details. But we met at the gym, and, she was there. At the time, I was just focused on service. Like a switch had happened in my mind where I was very self-centered for the earlier years. Up until around, 22, when I began to get myself physically healthier, because I grew up in an environment that was very volatile and dangerous. And, so I developed these kind of self-coping mechanisms to keep myself shielded off. And so even in relationship context, I've had a lot of relationships, but they were like here today, gone today, because, I just wasn't willing to open myself up. And this thing happened where I started to get physically healthier, and people at my university started to ask me for help. And so I started to teaching them some of the stuff that I was doing while, finishing my degree. And, when I started to dedicate myself, like I literally was thinking constantly, like, how can I help this person to achieve fill in the blank goal? And so that was my dominant thought process most of the days. And if you're constantly focused on service, it doesn't really match up well if you're being a terrible person in relationships and, disregarding other people's feelings. It just didn't fit anymore. And so when she was coming to the gym, I wasn't even thinking about, relationships or anything like that. I was just like, wow, this girl's dedicated. Like, she's getting out here, going at it, running on the treadmill. She was even coming when her friend wasn't coming. And so all I did was notice that. Never thought about like talking to her or anything like that. And one day at the gym, I just finished my own workout. Or I just finished up with a client and I was about to do my workout. And I was over by the Universal Gym, the one that's got the cables and the rows and lat pull, all that stuff. And she was on the most awkward piece of equipment in the gym, the abductor machine where your legs are flayed open. Anyways, and I didn't even really notice that until she dropped her headphones. And she's in this very compromising situation. All right. And so I just walked over and picked her headphones up and handed them to her. And she said, thank you. And I noticed she had a little bit of an accent. And because I work at a university, I worked with people from all over the world for a couple of years, about a year at that point. Let me say that, about a year and a half. And so I noticed little things in people's, in their communication, their language and how they speak. And so I guess that impressed her. She was like, oh, how did you know? She's from Kenya, right? Where you from? You know, shout out to Kenya. And so, so we just, from there, we started talking. And I would imagine, I don't really remember the details, but I would imagine she would have got off that very awkward machine and talked to me a bit. But here's the rub, and this is why I'm telling the story. Come to find out she was not about that gym life, all right? Because in my mind, I'm like, oh, we're going to work out together. It's going to be great. She's about this fitness thing. She was just coming to the gym to get in shape to go to Miami with her friends for a holiday weekend. I think it's Memorial Day or something.
Nothing wrong with that.
And then after that, she didn't come back again. We were together, we'll just say even a year later. Sometimes we'll be like, hey, babe, you want to go to the gym? And she's just like, nope, no, thank you. And to the point where I would be irritated, like, dude, why don't you want to take care of yourself? Like work out or whatever. Not that she wasn't like eating well and those kind of things, but in her mind, she's like, I'm done. She even said it when we were at dinner. She's like, I'm done. Why would I go to the gym? And so she's always been, a little bit not really focused on those kind of things. She just wants to enjoy life, be a good person, talk to her friends, have a good time, laugh. And there are some slight differences in our genetic makeup as far as our sleep patterns. And so she would definitely be more in that night wolf camp. All right, than I am for sure. She would have a tendency to come alive in the evening, whereas I'm definitely more of an early riser. I just gets up, man, but in the evening, I'm ready to wind it down and go to sleep. And so we had to find a happy medium, right? And that took years to cultivate. But what really helped was having our son, my youngest son, Braden, that really helped to get on those rhythms together, like get more on the same page, because the baby doesn't care as much, right? So we need to work together as a team here and create these patterns and have some consistency, right? And so, yeah, we have butt heads in the past, but now, even, what is today? It's 2 days ago, we had some friends over. And the friends know that I'm working on a book. My wife knows too, all right? And I'm just like, I don't care about, whatever, we can hang out, but I got to get to bed because I got to get up and work on this book in the morning. And so my friends asked, like, Shawn, just seriously, no problem at all. What time should we leave? And so it was 9:45. And so we're all sitting around, 9:45 came around. And then my friend was like, okay, it's time to go. And my wife is literally like, whoa, wait, we still got 1 minute. Like she was not trying to hear about this abrupt, like everybody's leaving now, because if it was left to her devices, we would continue, ad infinitum, until somebody pulls the plug.
Well, what I love about that story is that, number one, I think everybody butts heads in relationship because often you attract somebody who's a complement to you and that person is different than you. You don't want to be in a relationship with yourself, even though a lot of people think that they do,
right.
But you don't want to be in a relationship with yourself. It's not going to be the thing that's going to help you grow. And even though people typically have different routines, especially in relationship, my wife is the same way. She kind of comes alive at night. The foundation of like, here's why this is important to me. And also, I'm not going to try to change you.
Yes.
I'm going to show you the things that are beneficial for you. If you want to do them, great. But how can we also learn to sort of respect each other's approaches, which usually for me might be, I have like a thing that I'll do with my wife, which is like, she knows a few times a month, if she's out with her friends, like super late, she comes back. I'm like, babe, I need to pull out this red card. And the red card is the emergency card. Like I got a big day tomorrow. I have to get to bed. We kind of have our evening routine. I've talked about it a little bit in podcasts before, but if she's a lot late, I'm like, sweetie, tonight, the thing that we normally do, which is we might read together a little bit or watch like things that are not super stimulating on like a hyper red light with blue light blocker glasses on and everything like that. I'm like, we can't do that tonight. So you got to kind of wind yourself down a little bit and I got to fall asleep. And I respect my wife because she understands why that is so essential for me. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that we don't fight sometimes about it or butt heads about it, but it's all part of the process of working with another human being to see how can I support their goals and dreams. Okay, if sleep is a vehicle for that, how can I support their goals and dreams for that? And then for my wife too, she's in the early stage of building her first business. When I was building my first business, I was up late at night too.
Yeah.
So how can I knock her for that time being a very useful time for her?
Yeah.
Right.
You just said it.
It's all the things.
It's so powerful, man. People say these terms, and it's the problem is today, everybody has the ability to utilize these terms, but not really having a grounds for understanding how they work. So that one of those terms is communication, right? But what does that really mean? That doesn't just mean you're trying to get somebody to understand your thing. There's this wonderful quote, and I first heard Wayne Dyer say it, and it was from St. Francis of Assisi. It was to seek first to understand and then to be understood, right? So for me to first understand what is driving and motivating my wife, my best friend, what are her goals? What are her aspirations? What make her happy? What makes her feel good? And not just thinking that it's the things that are my things, right? And so paying attention to those things and coming into the conversation with respect and admiration for those things. And then from there, hoping, which again, I can't make her want to understand me. So I'm doing that, providing that space. And at the same time, especially in a loving relationship, the tables are going to turn where she's going to want to understand me. It's not just me coming with my thing like, this sleep scientist Shawn Stevenson said you need to go to sleep, right? It's not like that. It's having a space and communication and patience as well. Patience that quality in character is so valuable, especially today where everything is so fast paced, to have that delayed gratification. And that's something, again, that's another strength that I have. I'm very big on that. It's not a big deal to me. My wife, instant gratification. Tomorrow doesn't exist so often, And so, again, but I can learn things from that. And guess what? I've loosened up. And on the other side, she's gotten a little bit more, I don't want to say militant, but sometimes for some things, she'll be more on it than me.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we go out and we're on the road, I just spoke at an event in Atlanta. And, we're staying at a hotel and, I'm tired, just got into bed, whatever. And she's like, babe, what about that light over there? Like there was just a tiny light coming in from the blackout curtain. And I was like, babe, it's fine, But I used to be like, I'm taping it. I'm putting a chair. I'm like doing all this stuff, bringing tape. I used to bring this like blackout tape.
Yeah, electrical tape.
Yep. And so I'm like covering stuff up. Now I'm a little bit less neurotic. But by the way, those are some great tips for traveling as well.
100%.
Bring yourself a little bit of tape.
I've used them.
But there was something else too that you mentioned in that routine that for some people, it might be one of the things that's wrecking their sleep quality and they don't even realize it. So sleeping smarter is one thing, but oftentimes, what are the things we're doing to sleep dumb? Like, what are the things that we're doing that are really messing up our sleep quality? And that was the shower in the evening, like right before bed. So what's seen in the data is that there's a little bit of a rebound effect where having a hot shower, hot bath, if you have space allotted, your body temperature will, of course, increase, but it will actually drop down lower than that set point and help to facilitate sleep. Now, the timing here could be an issue because what could be happening is it's driving the body temperature up and then getting right into bed and then maybe tossing and turning a little bit, not being able to like relax because that core body temperature has been elevated and the skin surface as well. Core body temperature isn't going to be affected that much from a hot bath or hot shower if you're not in there that long. And so one of the things that's seen in the data, researchers at the Pittsburgh University School of Medicine did some really fascinating research on insomniacs. So these are folks with clinically proven sleep disruptions, sleep abnormalities, really struggling. And they wanted to find out what would happen if they cooled them off before them, while they sleep and before they go to bed. And so what they did was they fitted them with these cooling caps. And it was just running cool water over their head while they, laid down, went through their evening routine, laid down and went to sleep. Now, here's what happened. The insomniacs, and they had a healthy control. So this is a controlled clinical trial. The healthy controls took on average about 16 minutes to fall asleep after getting into bed. The insomniacs who struggled with sleep, suddenly they were falling asleep faster than the controls. They fell asleep on average 13 minutes after getting into bed, all right? And so we got a faster sleep onset, right? And within that, they found that they were now sleeping about 89% of the time that they were in bed, which is right on par with the healthy control group. So essentially their insomnia was gone. And this was true for 75% of the insomniacs in the clinical trial. Their sleep issues were resolved just by changing their temperature, by fitting them with these cooling caps. There isn't a drug on the market that's remotely close, not even the same universe as just cooling these folks off, right? And if you think about it, again, it's just that the head area is one of those areas. Like there's something about the cool, right? As cool as the other side of the pillow. Like it just feels good.
Relaxing.
It's relaxing. But what's happening, what's seen with insomniacs is that there's difficulty with thermoregulation. So their body being able to manage and control their body temperature in the evening. Now, guess where else in your body is controlling that internal thermostat? It's your hypothalamus, the same place as a suprachiasmatic nucleus. That again is trying to sync you up with the 24-hour solar day. All right. It's literally determining your temperature. That system is getting disrupted from something in their lifestyle. Something is happening that's causing this outcome, right? So even with the cooling caps, we're still treating a symptom, but it's working, right? And so what are some of the other things that could be? It could be exercising too late in the evening. I've seen that clinically. I've seen people coming in, and they're struggling with their sleep quality, sometimes for years. And they got a BJJ class that ends at like 9 p.m. and then they're trying to be in bed by 10, right? And they're just like, and they have their stories like, Shawn, this is the only time I could train, this is the only time. But usually the story is not 100% true. There's usually, if you could take a step back and maybe even work with somebody who can start to look at your life through a different set of eyes, we could see like, oh, hey, if you do this, or if you do this, maybe you could move this here. Because what's happening when you're wrecking your sleep quality, everything else in life gets harder, right? So that could be one of those things is, not getting conditions that are cool enough in the evening to facilitate sleep. And on average, depending on which expert you talk to, most experts agree it's around 68 degrees is ideal Fahrenheit in the bedroom. So, today, especially most people listening to this have access to a thermostat, which is a great blessing and gift. But even in cultures that don't have thermostats and, maybe they're again at the mercy, maybe very hot temperatures, even in the evening, across the board, no matter where you are on planet Earth, the temperature is going down in the evening. Yeah. If it's 120 during the day and maybe 105 during the night, it still went down. So your biology, your body is wanting to drop down with the environment, but we can superficially keep that body temperature up and we can get ourselves out of sync with the Earth's clock and throw off that ability for our temperature to downregulate, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Super makes sense. Have you seen anything on the market? There's different devices that people use to cool their mattress or have like a mattress pad. I use one of them. Curious, do you guys use anything, or are there anything on the market like this study where people are using this like cooling cap to sort of cool the body down? And do you recommend to people just to use the AC, which sometimes can be a little problematic? You get a little stuffy at night, that sort of stuff. Yeah. What are the best methods that you've seen to help people who run a little hot to start to cool down in the evening?
Yep. there's quite a few products now, again, just in the last few years for like mattress pads that you can put over your existing mattress. There are, kind of cooling technologies with pillows, with sheets that are thermoregulating. The list goes on and on. There's so many great things, and some people swear by them, and it could be a game changer. But again, in some instances, we're treating a symptom.
Right.
So we want to get to the root cause, like why is your temperature running hot in the evening? And that's usually due to stuff that we're doing during the day. That said, this is not a place where we can't supplant that and allow ourselves to use this treatment to get better sleep right now, where we sort other things out. So that being said.
Can I add in one more comment there?
Sure.
So one comment on that is that I know that a lot of couples use the same sort of comforter. My wife likes something heavier. Yeah. I like something lighter. So I run hot in the evening with a heavier comforter. If I just had a little sheet, I'm fine. I don't need anything more, and I'm fine. My body temperature is good. So that is one of the reasons why we use one of these mattress pad situations. You can Google them. There's a bunch that are out there, is because way back in the day, I mean, you probably know more about this than anybody else. People wouldn't often sleep necessarily like right up against each other. Couples, they would have either mattresses that would be separate. They could be in separate rooms. Yeah. That's kind of a modern phenomenon. And within that, and there's a lot of beautiful reasons to do that, but you typically have the same comforter. And that is a whole temperature regulation situation for people. That's why I think that if I had just the sheet, I'd be fine. But I do like cuddling with my wife. Yeah. It's nice that we have the same comforter. Yeah. So I have to use technology to help bring my temperature down a bit.
You just said exactly what I was going to talk about.
Okay, sorry. I stole your thunder.
No, this is perfect because you got another great firsthand experience with, and here's another thing that's really interesting is that on average, men tend to run a little bit warmer than women, right? And so in the couple, there's this dynamic where you're not trying to date yourself. There are these kind of opposites attract phenomenon. My wife is definitely a cool body. All right. So I've heard this so many times when she gets into bed, these are the exact words. Ooh, you're so warm. So now she's going to try to siphon my warmness, I'm good. I'm not too hot, not too cold. And then she puts these dead body feet on me. All right. Feels like they're straight from the morgue on me. And so now I'm like, I'm making all these noises and she thinks it's hilarious. But I understand I'm her little heater. I get it.
But don't you dare touch her when you got cold hands.
Man, oh my God. Are you kidding me? Literally, she'll literally fight me. She'll ball up into a turtle shell. Yeah. And so I'm very aware of that. Even today, I usually get out of bed first, and I came over to her when I was walking out of the room, and she had a part of her leg was sticking out of the cover. And I knew if I touched that leg with my hands, so I just washed my hands and my hands were cold from the water was still cold. And I was like, she would be so pissed at me. So let me not do that. So I think I used the back of my hand or something, like touched her leg or something. So considerate, man. Anyways, my wife is perfect, just for the record. If anybody tries to snitch, all right, she's perfect.
We'll clip that for social media.
Even with that phenomenon. So this is why the mattress pad, for example, you can cover just one side of the bed to cool off, right? And another thing here is just in that same vein with that thermoregulation. So for some people, even hearing 68 degrees, they were just like, oh, no, that's not happening. That's too cold, right? So again, it's finding that happy medium. Because for me, I would probably put that bad boy on like maybe 65. I like it. The cooler, the better. I want to have my comforter. I want to have my little like chilly vibe in the room. My wife, no. So we settled on like 68, 69-ish. And she's seen also, here's the crazy thing. If the temperature is anything above that, she tends to sweat in the evening. I don't do that, and generally I'm not, but her body is still like that thermoregulation is something's happening there and sorting itself out. And so, you got to work together, figure out what's ideal, and be willing to test and try things at the end of the day.
People turn 40 and all of a sudden they start noticing things in their body, things that weren't happening before. It's easier to put on weight. It's harder to lose it. What do you feel are some of the top mistakes that people make when they hit 40 and beyond when it comes to health and nutrition?
Absolutely. It's a great question. Obviously, a lot of people go through this, and it really has to do with their hormones changing. There's a shift that takes place, whether it's perimenopause or men going through andropause. And so the biggest mistake is really not understanding that our hormones are changing based on where we are in our life cycle. And for a lot of people, even going from high school in that diet and then moving into their 20s and 30s and just seeing like, I can't, quote, get away with certain things anymore because our hormones are changing. And also just even comparing ourselves to maybe our peers and being able to do certain things that they can do, for example, and, quote, get away with that we can't. And so our hormones are really unique to us. And so one of the most important things as we age is really paying attention to the quality versus the quantity. All right. And so what I mean by that is it's about getting more efficient. Whereas a lot of times we try to add things onto our plate. My advocation is to take some things off of your plate. I was just with a friend of mine yesterday, Shalene Johnson. She's been in the fitness industry. She actually has the Guinness World Record for like the most fitness DVDs sold ever. Like,
oh, wow.
She's been in the game for a long time. But she shared as she's in her mid 50s now that she's completely transformed and done things that she wouldn't expect that are leading to better health outcomes when it comes to her body composition.
Oh, wow. Like what?
Like, for instance, she used to work out on average like 3 hours a day, which is just like, it's crazy. Of course, that's her business too,
That's
to
her job.
be fit. But she found that it was starting to lead to basically a lack of returns, right? So diminishing returns were happening with all that investment in fitness. She called me while she was out on her morning walk, which is something she would have never thought that she would do, this, quote, zone 2 cardio, where you're walking at a brisk pace, but you're still able to maintain a conversation. And versus her doing high intensity interval training basically every day. And now she's found that her body composition is actually improved, but more importantly, her mood and her happiness and her perception of herself is improved. And so there's two things I want to talk about here. Number one is using this, which it should be Captain Obvious, but utilizing more walking as we're getting older. Our genes expect us to walk. We're bipedal, all right? There's other animals out here running around on all fours. We have these 2 feet, and we're really hardwired throughout our evolution to be able to walk. And this is one of the things we're going to talk about today. We have certain cultures that exist on planet Earth still, hunter-gatherer tribes, where it's built into their culture. It's a deep kind of unconscious awareness that if I don't move, I will die. If I don't move, I'm not going to be able to procure my food, to be able to find shelter, to take care of myself and my tribe. In our culture, walking is optional. Movement is optional. And it's great we got DoorDash on our phones, but at the same time, our innovations are taking more and more movement out of them. And so understanding that our genes expect us to walk, and the question is, what are we getting when we're walking more? And what this is versus high intensity interval training, which is great. By the way, it has its place. It's not that she doesn't do that occasionally, but when we're doing that, we're evoking this kind of sympathetic nervous system, and adrenaline is getting released, and it's going and cleaving off our fatty acids and using them for fuel. But a lot of it's getting reabsorbed, by the way. But it's kind of like a quick hit, literally high intensity interval training, HIT, HITT. But then the kind of residual benefits are not as much as when we do something like walking, because when we're walking, we can actually be closer to not necessarily a sympathetic state, but because we're in more of a calm space and we're not pushing our body too much, walking, and this is one of the big takeaways from today for everybody, walking is one of the few things where your body will directly use fat for energy to fuel what you're doing, all right? Versus high intensity interval training is very glycolytic. So it's utilizing your stored glycogen, the glucose that you might have had recently, breaking down glycogen from your liver, your muscles, and then eventually it'll start burning fat. All right. It's not necessarily as efficient. All right. Now, as far as just getting directly to the fat. And so when we're walking, and again, just walking at a brisk pace, and this is something that you can stack as well. When you're walking, we can have a meeting. We could listen to a podcast. We could catch up with our kids. We can, just kind of, take this time to be more meditative. It's not a meditation per se, but it is meditative to walk. for me, I find that I have a lot of great ideas when I'm walking. And even researchers at Stanford found that when people were dealing with a problem and they would go for a 10 to 15-minute walk, they would have a 60% increase in something called divergent thinking, which is basically increased creativity and being able to look at our problems and solve them from a different perspective, right? So there's all these different things we can stack when we're walking. And not to mention, again, that quote zone 2 area, we're going to be able to just pull off and utilize our stored fat for energy. And so one other little piece here that we can add is when to do it. Ideally, if we can get a little bit of walking in the early part of the morning in a fasted state, it's going to be nice if we can. This isn't a time necessarily, again, you got to go for an hour walk if you don't feel like that. But being able to just, and this is something I actually do every day, even if it's 5 minutes, but I tend to do like a 10 to 15 minute walk in the morning. And also you can get the sun exposure, right? The fresh air, all the things are stacking and getting that circadian rhythm lined up outside. I can go on and on, but also post meal. And the glucose goddess, I think you talked with her recently as well, but this is one of the things that she's affirmed in her data. And Shalene actually just got back from Italy and she saw, one of these towns that have been around for centuries. She was shocked that pretty much it seemed like the whole town would go for a walk after dinner, right? And it's just like, what is going on? It's a cultural implement that they're doing. It's just like, how do they know this? Like, were they studying their cells to be able to do this? It's just built into the process. And, so post walk, that's going to help to shuttle all of that glucose into our cells more efficiently. And so the last piece I want to share is our muscle sensitivity. So when we talk about insulin resistance, which is what we see as we age, tends to in this culture, what we're really talking about is not just our fat cells. The primary site of insulin absorption and utilization is our muscles.
Right.
And so that's another thing that we see as we age is a loss of muscle. Does it have to be that way is the question. And the data indicates absolutely not. And so here's the rub. Our muscles work on a use it or lose it basis. And so it becomes even more important, again, quantity over quality, that we utilize our muscles, dedicate some strength training each week to ensure that we're not just maintaining our muscles, but even having the potential to grow some more of that kind of depot. And the last part is that our muscles are also, it's in essence a storage container or a reservoir for anti-aging hormones. And so people that are physically fit, physically active, that have more muscle on their frame when they age, and should an injury occur, they recover faster. Not to mention, we see a significant reduction in injury in the first place. So when we're carrying more muscle on our frame and we are injured, so we see about a 25% faster recovery. And for many people, especially as they age, sometimes when they're injured, that's the end of the show. Right? A broken hip could just put you completely into a sedentary lifestyle and just all downhill from there. Another thing that she shared that, again, I've seen, I worked at a university for many years, so I got to talk and work with people from all over the world. But being able to see people in certain parts of Asia where they literally sit on the floor, right? That's where they sit. They sit on the floor. They don't have furniture. When they eat, when they have tea, they're sitting on the floor. They don't have broken hips in that culture. For some strange reason. That's just, they're not having all these fractures. Well, guess what? They're doing all of these squats, dozens, 100 squats a day, just getting up and down off the floor. And so this is something else where we can find more quality over quantity. We don't have to do 100 squats. What if we just spend some time sitting on the floor more often? And this is something, again, I've implemented into my lifestyle.
What's an example of how you're a family man, right? You got 2 kids.
Yeah.
You're happily married and have been happily married for now how many years?
We've been together for 19 years. We just celebrated our 16-year anniversary.
That's right. I think I saw it on Instagram. Happy anniversary, by the way.
Thank you.
How have you guys weaved this into your life, especially within the family?
Awesome. Well, I have 3 kids. One of them's out the house.
Oh, yes,
thankfully.
That's right.
We've got 2 more to go. No, I love my family. I love my kids so much. And you already know this, man. You see the culture that we've built. My oldest son is working in fitness right now. I never told him to do it. He's just around it. And ever since he was old enough to get a gym membership, I was taking him with me, to the Gold's Gym in when we lived in Ferguson, Florissant, in Missouri. And, now he's teaching this to other people. And like literally thousands of people are following him now. And he's extending this gift through his unique life experience. And the same thing holds true with my youngest son. Our dedication to fitness isn't about fitness, it's about family. Because for me, the number one reason that I'm training each day is so that I can be more resilient and show up for them, so that I can endure any challenges that are ahead and lead my family. That's the number one reason I'm doing it. I'm not trying to get the abs and all the things. That can be a side effect, by the way, but the main objective is like something of a higher order and something that really creates another level of accountability. And so my kids see that this isn't just about looking good. This is about performance and being your best self. And so some of the ways that we've integrated this into our culture, like even my youngest son just started back to school today, but I knew that he had the day off yesterday and I was going into the studio late. So instead of me running off to the gym, I grabbed him and I said, also I know his mind, my youngest son's mind, he likes to have his schedule, right? My oldest son is whatever, right? Anytime, anywhere. Like if I say, hey, let's go run to the gym, let's go, on a hike, let's go. My youngest son is like, you're interrupting his plans, all right? And so it's also understanding the psychology of your family members, which takes patience, it takes energy, basically, at the core of this, to be able to assess, like, what is the way to get through to this individual. One of the big secrets that should not be a secret, when I was working as a clinician for many years, the number one thing that people would complain about as to why they couldn't achieve their goals, like I'd give them these science-backed behavior changes to do to get what they wanted, whether it's getting off the metformin, their lisinopril, they had hypertension, whatever, lose weight, whatever. This is the way to go. But whenever I would dig and find out what's the reason that you're not able to implement this, people would do this. Well, it's just my kids, they wouldn't want to eat this stuff, or, my husband, he's always making this, really bad food, my parents. People would start blaming the people closest to them as to why they couldn't get the results that they wanted, right? And it took some time for me to help them to kind of redirect towards their inner power and stop blaming, which is not to say that our family members don't complicate our lives, because they absolutely do. But for us to understand that we get to create the culture that we want, but it starts with us, right? And so by working on with a lot of different people and then being able to implement this stuff in my life and test this stuff, I've seen it hold true. We have to have the energy, which again, that comes from taking better care of myself. Now I have more patience, now I have more understanding, because here's what I was going to say was, what all of them are struggling with and what you and I struggle with as well from time to time is that we just want our family members to do what we want them to do. Everything's cool, all right? Just don't kill my vibe, all right? We're everything's good. I know what I'm doing here. I know what I'm talking about. Just fall in line, all right? Act right. And people are not going to act right. People that you love, they're their own person, and they're going to do things that don't necessarily fit with what you want them to do. And so there's this wonderful quote from St. Francis of Assisi that says, seek first to understand and then seek first to understand and then to be understood. Whereas we most often, we just want people to understand us, to understand what we're trying to communicate, to listen to us. You need to listen first. That's really the secret, but it's harder. It's not that it's impossible when we don't feel good and we don't have energy. It's a lot harder. And so pouring into our cup, we've all heard this before, put your mask on first, all the things. No, for real. And so last point here was, with my youngest son, knowing his mindset, I gave him a heads up. It was like 2 hours prior. I was like, hey, be at 9 o'clock. We're going to do some training. All right. And I could see a little bit of, but it's also like, well, dad got to me with enough cushion on my day off where I'm kind of chilling out. And so I trained with him, right? I could have, again, skated off to the gym, but this was an opportunity for us to do something together, for him to see what I'm doing, to model, and also for him to have that physical experience. And one of my mantras, I should put a TM on this, is that families that train together remain together.
Yeah.
All right. People have heard this, families that play together stay together. Families that train together remain together. there's something really remarkable when humans come together under the spirit of challenge that bonds you. And again, this is like a subconscious thing, but after we completed the workout, it's so cool. He just came up to me and he's like, "Dad, thank you so much for training with me today."
That's beautiful.
And so that's a couple of the things we've done just in the context of family fitness. But of course, we're going to talk more about the food piece here in a moment, which is really, it can be the most complex, but also the highest leverage thing that we can address in our family culture.
Well, let's pivot to food, and we'll start with the individual, but naturally we'll work into the concepts, the family as well. What are, on that same theme, what are some of the mistakes that you see people doing, especially in particular? I turned 40 last year. And so I've been taking my audience on a little bit of a journey through even my own navigation. I'm not an expert in this field like you are, but I get to interview a lot of people, and even sometimes I'm confused. And last year, one of the things that I saw, especially having come from the world of being vegetarian and then a raw foodist, which we both were at one point in time, and a vegan, is that I realized wow, I, unlike you, I hadn't caught the fitness bug. In particular, I was good at walking. I was good at meeting up with friends and being active and hiking, which is good. I had the zone too, but I didn't have the strength training piece, right? And partly the reason that I didn't have the strength training piece is that I always felt like I never made progress in the gym, even when I'd have 6 months of really focusing on it. And I was missing the other side, which I was under eating on protein, which goes back to one of your core things earlier that you were talking about, is that as we age, and I think the stats are once you hit 40, you lose on average 8% of muscle mass every decade for those that are not eating adequate protein, and also those that are not stimulating their body through training, right? And we need the walking and we need the training, as you mentioned earlier. So I got serious and said, I need to find a support team around me and make this a priority. And I've shared a little bit about things with my audience, and I started to notice the results because I was putting the right pieces of the puzzle together. So even somebody like me was so confused about some of the most basic things that were there. What else do you see people confused about, which is part of the reason that you do the work that you do?
We're so eye to eye. This was the other part that I was going to go to when we talk about food, and especially getting over 40, is the importance of protein. Now, one of the studies that I mentioned in the Eat Smarter Family Cookbook was done by researchers at St. Louis University, which is, my hometown. Shout out to everybody there.
Yeah, exactly.
And what they did was they took test subjects who were otherwise healthy, but overweight or obese. Their metabolic factors, their numbers were, again, what they considered to be healthy still. And in an effort to lose weight and or reduce body fat, they put them on 2 different types of breakfasts. All right. Now, these 2 breakfast items were the same amount of calories, but they had very different effects at the end of this 8-week study. So one group was told to consume eggs for breakfast, okay, high protein, high fat, or a bagel. All right. Same amount of calories, keep in mind. Okay. And of course, during this process, they do put them on a calorie restricted diet, 1,000 calories less. So let me just put that out there. And they tracked their biometrics over the course of this 8-week study. Now, here's what happened at the end of 8 weeks. And by the way, this was just for breakfast. All right. They just had them eat the eggs for breakfast or the, what can be considered an ultra processed food for breakfast. And here's what happened. At the end of the 8-week study, and actually, I'm going to pull the numbers up for you. This is crazy. At the end of the 8-week study, the people who consumed the eggs lost 61% more of their body mass index. All right. Again, same calorie diet, by the way, a 65% greater weight loss, a 34% greater reduction in waist circumference, and 16% greater loss of body fat.
Wow.
All right. Same calories they're consuming, but by eating the eggs, something changed with their metabolic health. And the question is, what is going on here? Well, when we're talking about more of a protein-dense implement, why does this work? Why is protein so important, especially as we age? One of the things you just mentioned, our muscles are literally built from proteins. And if we're not providing that raw material, you can get stronger, you can burn calories, but you're not going to be able to actually build more muscle tissue unless you're providing that essential building block. But it goes further than that. When we have these conversations about hormones, which is what I started off with, your hormones are made from proteins. If you're not providing these essential building blocks, you can't even make testosterone and progesterone and the list goes on, adrenaline. These are all made from proteins. So your body can do a patchwork job. But if you provide the raw materials, it can do so much better. And so and just to give like a really visceral understanding of this, when we look at each other or when we look at ourselves in the mirror, what we're seeing predominantly is the proteins that we've eaten or the lack thereof. And also minerals. That's a big part of what we see when we look in the mirror. It is such an important part of this macronutrient conversation, but it's been left out. It's kind of been like pushed to the side in essence in all this battle about carbs and fat the past couple of years. And it's so strange because protein is arguably the most important of these macronutrients because of it is literally the building blocks for so much.
Can I chime in with something?
Absolutely.
Are you familiar with a lot of the conversations around satiety and people talking about how also protein, it seems, to fill you up more and make you less hungry throughout the day? Thoughts on that?
I was literally, but we're right here. We're
I feel bad because I feel like I'm stealing your punchline out of this.
That was exactly what I was about to mention next. So within that study and a couple other studies that I mentioned in the cookbook, look at the satiety implications because the really cool thing about protein-dense foods is that they do, in fact, trigger higher levels of satiety. And they also have this stronger thermic effect, right? So it takes more energy to digest proteins than it does fats or carbohydrates. And my belief is that it's because your body takes it very, very seriously when it gets its hands on some high-quality proteins because it can be used for so much. Whereas fats and carbohydrates tend to be used a lot as energy substrates, whereas protein is used to build things, all right? Not to say that fats aren't used to build things as well. One of those things is, building our brain, for example. There are certain fats that get shuttled across the blood-brain barrier to help to build our brain cells or regenerate them, to enable signal transduction, stability, those kind of things. But predominantly, our tissues are built with proteins. And so some of the studies indicate an increased production of versus a carbohydrate diet is I shared a couple of studies like this, a carbohydrate food versus a high protein food, higher production of GLP-1, which is getting a lot of news right now.
Right.
Higher production of peptide YY, leptin, the list goes on. There's many different satiety hormones, and we cover a lot of them in the book as well. Because for years, it's just like leptin and ghrelin. But we know that protein is going to kick on all of these satiety factors. And this is why what we see is it's very difficult in general for us to eat a lot of high protein food in a meal because of the satiety implications. Whereas if we have a lot of carbohydrates, we can tend to eat those a little bit easier. And let me lay all this out. So this is going to get wrapped in this bow. And this study is new. It's just done recently. This was conducted. It's a ward study that's done at the NIH. All right. So this is where people are locked in. You can't sneak out and go to Subway or to Whole Foods. It's a 28-day study. And
ward meaning like a prison ward?
It's not a prison per se, but if you're at the NIH, I get images of like the Hawkins lab in Stranger Things.
Like these are all volunteers that are part of this ward study.
Yeah.
Okay,
they're not just like snatching people in a van off the street.
Okay, or like that they were, I think, which is unethical now, but like back in the day, they used to take prisoners and say, okay, you guys are all eating vegetable oil and you guys are going to have saturated fat and let's see what ends up happening.
It's not even back in the day. It still happens. It still happens.
Really?
Yes.
I thought those studies were like unethical now.
I mean, there are unethical aspects to it.
Okay, got it.
But we could even circle back and talk about a recent study done on prisoners.
With multivitamins? Is that the one?
We talked about that before.
We talked about that before.
So that was pretty recent.
Okay, got it. So ward study.
Yes, so this is a ward study. Again, this was conducted at the NIH. And they took 20 healthy test subjects, 10 men, 10 women. And they also, as a crossover study, so they did both different treatment groups. One group is given, and this is a randomized trial, so you didn't know where he was going to go first. Ultra-processed foods, made up their diet. There's meals of ultra processed foods, but the same energy makeup as the people who are eating the minimally processed / whole food based diet. All right. Same calories, same macronutrient ratios, also comparable sugar as well. But one is coming from ultra processed and the other is coming from whole foods or whole food based meals. All right. And so again, the test subjects, what's so cool is they experience both parts of the study, right? So after 2 weeks, they would switch to the other diet. Now, here's what's crazy. So after compiling the data, when people were eating the ultra processed meals, again, although that they had the same, and they got to eat as much as they wanted or as little as they wanted. But when eating the ultra processed food, test subjects ate about 500 more calories a day on average. Something wouldn't kick on with their appetite, just kind of like the suppression. Their cravings were stronger and their appetite. So we got cravings and appetite. They're slightly different. Appetite is how much you eat. It wouldn't get shut off. And also, for some strange reason, it's unconscious, they ate less of the protein in their ultra processed meals and ate more of the carbs and fat. They were just kind of driven to do that. All right. So those satiety factors weren't kicking on. And protein, that's what can get overlooked in the study, is that they weren't eating as much of the protein that they had offered to them. And of course, just as a result, people gained about 2 pounds in that study group, in that study period.
The people that are eating the ultra processed foods.
Ultra processed foods. Versus when they were eating the minimally processed / whole food based meals, they lost 2 pounds on average over the course of those 2 weeks. And again, ate about 500 calories less. They were just more satisfied. And so this speaks to the real part of this conversation. And I just want to end this today and all the infighting that our colleagues, our friends, battling about which diet is best, speaking, preaching to the choir and debating over minutia, when the majority of our citizens here in the United States, and also this is a worldwide issue now, most of our citizens are eating mostly ultra processed foods. We're debating about whether keto is better or, whatever, you know what I mean? Like your ratios of fats and carbohydrates and whatnot. Most people are eating fake food.
And living sedentary lifestyles.
Yeah.
And not strength training, right? So you add all those things together and it's like most people just need help with the basics and to make them simplified so they can live a long, healthy life and minimize their risk of chronic disease.
Precisely. And that chronic disease, we're beyond epidemic proportions. Last year, the CDC's numbers came out and they stated that 60% of American adults now have at least one chronic disease.
Crazy.
60%. And 40% have 2 or more chronic diseases. And they put this out in this little infographic to, I guess, maybe soften the blow. It's a little nice. It looks nice, like happy little cartoon characters. But everybody's sick. But that's not what the images look like, right? And also in that infographic, by the way, they noted that we have a $4.2 trillion healthcare system here. And they're talking about where money's going to help to reduce these things. But no, everything's getting worse. And a big part of this is the fact that we're not just fueling our body on this low quality stuff, we're building our tissues out of fake things. And what does the problem really look like? A lot of people have talked about this. I think we talked about this in our last conversation. According to the BMJ, 60% of American adults' diet is made of ultra processed food today. The average American, I was far worse, by the way. All right. For me, it was up close to 80 to 90%.
Back in the day.
This is not an exaggeration. Absolutely. Yes. And this also led to the disease onset that I experienced when I was 20 with an advanced arthritic condition of my spine and my bones. I broke my hip, which is usually reserved for people much older, just while I was out running at track practice because I was made out of garbage, really. And so, but here's the thing, and this is the first book that's sharing this data. I'm very grateful for that, but it's also, this is a call to action. A recent study came out looking at ultra-processed food consumption of our children in the United States. And this was a big reason that I wrote this book. It was centered around this. This was published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. They looked at food consumption of our children aged 2 to 19 for about 20 years. In 1999, the average American child's diet was 61% ultra-processed food, already beating out American adults. But by 2018, the average American child's diet is now close to 70% ultra-processed foods.
Wow.
And what are the outcomes that we're seeing? Skyrocketing rates of obesity in our children, skyrocketing rates of diabetes, lifestyle-induced type 2 diabetes in our children, significant degrees of early onset of heart disease in our children, mental health epidemics. The list goes on and on and on. This is not without repercussions. And this is really the mission, is to understand, like, again, we have an opportunity to make some shifts here. But if people aren't aware of how bad it is, and I know this, like, I grew up in this in the 80s. It was revolutionary when Pop-Tarts came out. All right. I was there popping out of the toaster, and I got this like rectangular breakfast ready for me. And I'm going to school, and just to fit in with my friends, you know, all the kids, we've got our little, you know, I was also there when Lunchables came out, you know, but we've got all these ultra processed foods. It was a game changer when my grandmother gave me Capri Suns. All right. That little straw with the pouch, and that was in my lunchbox. I had like a Knight Rider lunchbox or something like that. But this was just how it was. We didn't realize that our culture was now programming us to eat ultra-processed fake foods. And just really quickly, if you can, let's make this distinction. I've been on a mission talking about this, but also a lot of my colleagues are now speaking out about it. Humans have been processing foods forever. All right. Whether we're talking about, you know, cooking something, right? Cooking meat or cooking a potato, or taking an olive and pressing the oil out. That's been done for centuries. That's processing, and that's not what we're talking about. Ultra processed foods are when there's a field of corn or a field of wheat, and somehow through an immense amount of processing, that field of wheat becomes fruity pebbles. All right. It is so denatured that you can no longer recognize where this thing comes from, not to mention all of the added, you know, the preservatives, food dyes, all these different chemicals. And one of the things I'm also bringing forward in this project is the WHO has denoted that glyphosate is a class 2A carcinogen. That means it probably causes cancer. There's been a lot of talk about glyphosates and its dangers, but I just want to get right to the point. This very likely causes cancer in humans. And the Environmental Working Group did an analysis and found that almost 90%, upwards of 90% of grain products on our store shelves are contaminated with glyphosate at amounts that are far exceeding what's tolerable or considered safe. All right. And so when I was trying to get healthy in college, when I was experiencing this condition, and I was like, you know what, I need to grow up. I need to put the Honey Nut Cheerios and Captain Crunch to the side. And I'm going to eat an adult cereal. So I got the Quaker oatmeal squares. All right. It's so wholesome. You know, look at this guy on the box. He's a Quaker. Right. And come to find out, that was like number one on their list of the most contaminated with glyphosate cereals. Wow. Was this Quaker oatmeal squares. And I was doing that because of the marketing. It's high fiber, right? Whole grains. All of this is called health washing. Using these healthy catchwords to attract unaware buyers to buy an ultra processed food. Because at the end of the day, that Quaker oatmeal squares is the true essence of an ultra processed food. And so I'm trying to improve my health with that. And this is why there kept being these blockades. Of course, we can get better. If we're just stepping away or reducing the amount of ultra processed foods that we're consuming, we're going to see improvements in our health. And that's what we tend to see with a lot of these diets. Whether it's a vegan protocol, whether it's a paleo protocol, keto protocol, when we switch over and start eating more real foods, our health improves. But we put it all into that particular diet framework. And not to say that any of them are not valuable, because they all are valuable. But the question is, what's best for you, and what's at the heart of why people get better when they're doing these things? It tends to be because they're eating more real food.
Hey, YouTube, if you enjoyed what you just saw, keep watching for more great content on how to improve your brain and your life.
We see many people who are patently obese, who have an appearance of a large body and have very small amount of visceral fat. We call them FODIes. They're fat outside and they're thin inside.